Good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank all of you who have been able to return so far, and I continue to call the regional caucuses and those of you outside in the foyer area to please make your way back into the Assembly Hall, and we will get started. We will start at 1:10, which is in 2 minutes, and we will pick up on the resolutions and decision-making at that point. Proceed till about 1:45, close to 2, turn to fiscal relations. Following fiscal relations, we'll pick up on a few more resolutions and then turn to the Moose High campaign announcement. Again, a few more resolutions to sort of break up that pace that we often get to when we get to the late resolutions. And then we also have the Indigenomics presentation as a part of our afternoon. We do have, I think it's 5 or 6 on-time resolutions left to address, and we want to get to those as quickly as we can. And then we'll turn to the late resolutions. I did note that it is our anticipation that the late resolutions start at number 32, but we do want to seek the concurrence of the Assembly to move to late resolution 35, only because it deals with the voting rights of a participating First Nation here in the Assembly. So we'll deal with that and then pick up with the remainder and work our way through that in the afternoon. All right, with that, I'll just ask Matthew to do some welcoming remarks en français, and we shall get started.
Sorry, guys, they're coming up one by one. Do you want him just give it to me when you get them, and I'll put them in order. 49. That would definitely be a help.
Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Juste pour vous informer de notre plan pour cet après-midi, on a les résolutions, les ébauches. Après ça, on va continuer avec nos résolutions dernière minute. On va essayer de travailler jusqu'à 1h45. À cette heure-là, on va aller en discussion de relations financières. On va retourner aux résolutions. Puis entre les résolutions, on va aller sur la campagne du Moose High Indigenomics allocation, puis on fermera la session on espère, vers 16h, puis à 18h ce soir, on a la célébration d'hiver de l'APN. J'aimerais attendre peut-être un autre 5 minutes pour avoir assez de délégués dans la salle pour commencer avec nos résolutions, comme ça, dans 2-3 minutes. Une fois que je suis organisé, on va recommencer. Merci. gentlemen, we'll resume our conversation on resolutions. We'll move to draft resolution number 12, ébauche de résolution numéro 12, participation pleine, directe et inconditionnelle des Premières Nations au projet de la loi C-69, y compris à l'élaboration conjointe des règlements et de la politique. I believe you have the draft resolution. L'autre chose que j'ai été dit en ce que la traduction, c'est de ne pas changer de langue trop souvent, sinon ils ont la difficulté de me suivre. First, I'll check nos proposeurs et nos coproposeurs, Chef Archie Wakwan? Okay, I see Chief's here. Chief Sanderson. Chief Bull is going to second that one. Thank you, Chief Bull. I'll read the therefore be it resolved. Pour ce motif, les chefs en assemblée, enjoignant à l'Assemblée des Premières Nations de presser le Sénat de revoyer le projet de la loi C-69, loi indiquant la loi sur l'évaluation d'impact sur la loi sur la Régie canadienne de l'énergie, modifiant la loi sur la protection de la navigation et apportant des modifications corrélatives aux d'autres lois, au Comité sénatorial de l'énergie, de l'environnement et des ressources naturelles, aux fins que les déteneurs de droits participent au processus d'audience dans un délai qui respecte leur protocole et processus unique, afin que ces audiences se terminent avant la prochaine élection fédérale. 2. Appuie la position des Premières Nations de la région d'Athabasca sur la nécessité de ratifier le projet de la loi C-69 et d'améliorer la liste des projets dans le cadre du projet de la loi C-69, afin d'inclure les projets in situ les projets qui proviennent avoir une incidence sur les droits inscrits dans l'article 35, les réserves, la qualité de l'eau, les oiseaux migrateurs, les espaces en péril, les bassins hydrogéographiques, de sites comme la rivière de la Paix, la rivière des Esclaves, le fleuve Mackenzie et le grand lac des Esclaves, et des répercussions sur les aires protégées, par exemple le site des patrimoines mondial de l'UNESCO, comme le parc national Wood Buffalo. 3. Appelant que Canada a engagé un dialogue ciblé après les Premières Nations afin de déterminer, de tenir compte de les déclencher des protocoles, les aliments et les processus nécessaires à l'élaboration conjointe des politiques et des règlements. 4. Enjoignant à l'APN de continuer l'appui et de coordonner, dans la mesure du possible, les interventions et la participation des Premières Nations, des organisations régionales et des organisations provinciales et territoriales au processus d'élaboration conjoint. Cela pourrait inclure la mise en place des processus régionaux spécifiques pour répondre aux préoccupations particulières des régions, y compris des dispositions en matière de soutien sur le cadre d'une relation de nation à nation. 5. Réitérer leur appel au Canada en vue de fournir un financement adéquat directement aux Premières Nations afin qu'elles puissent participer pleinement, directement et inconditionnellement à l'élaboration conjointe des règlements et des politiques dans le cadre du projet de loi C-69. 6. Appelant le Canada à veiller à ce que l'élaboration des règlements et des politiques respecte pleinement les obligations constitutionnelles et autres obligations juridiques de la Couronne envers les Premières Nations, ainsi que les normes établies par la Déclaration des Nations unies sur les droits du peuple autochtone. 7. demandant à l'APN de continuer à tenir des séances d'information régionales pour appuyer les Premières Nations, les organisations régionales, les organisations provinciales et territoriales dans leur processus. Je voudrais ouvrir la salle pour discussion sur la résolution numéro 12. Open the floor for discussion on resolution number 12. Oh, right. The mover did ask for a video to be shown. I think we have that queued up for resolution 12. And once you do, please show the video.
Pituta si magote, kianoma e pescawino, mixuniho, kiwit noxe Alberta kagi taskia. Meisa fui mustoski yusi strati, sa se yanota kagi vigia. Kiabetoma noskisram stegitistina na utaskino. Utini ganmi na isinu wa kitatabatistata. If our lands are in danger, we must do anything that we can to protect them. Our elders have seen the signs and know that the park is failing. Mikshu Cree First Nation asked UNESCO World Heritage Committee to recognize that our Wood Buffalo National Park is in danger.
Wood Buffalo National Park was designated as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO because the ecological value is so unprecedented in Canada. There is literally nowhere else like it in the world. You've got the Peace Athabasca Delta, which is the largest freshwater delta in the world. There are millions of migratory birds which pass through the region. And there's extensive boreal forest, which is critical to absorbing the world's carbon. There are extremely rare salt plains and unique perched basins, and some of the last remaining intact habitat for wood buffalo and the whooping crane, which are threatened and endangered species. These are critical environmental values that need protection.
We've been trapping here all our life, hunting, fishing. Seem to forget that these values have to be protected, have to be passed down to the next generation.
For the Mikshu Cree First Nation, the Wood Buffalo National Park, this is an opportunity to protect our traditional ways and our inherent treaty rights.
The park is supposed to be protected, but with development all around, the entire ecosystem is at risk. And that means the Mikshu is at risk.
Mikisew tries to engage with industry and government regarding the ways resource development impact our traditional lands and our way of life. We've got contamination from oil sands to the south. The delta is drying up because of the tremendous water use in the oil sands and a number of hydroelectric dams in BC to the west. Uranium abandonment on Lake Athabasca to the east. And to exacerbate everything, we have climate change. And then in the midst of this, the federal and provincial governments have just gutted their environmental protection legislation.
The biggest threat to the delta from the oil sands is the rate at which they use water and the release of contaminants to air and water. Oil sands mining and processing require enormous volumes of water already, and given the projections, it's likely to double in the near future.
We've seen steady declines of water levels and flow rates on the Athabasca River, and we know damn well that when it gets here, it's polluted.
Recent studies show that there are millions of liters a day of toxins seeping from the tailings ponds into the Athabasca River, and then they're carried downstream to the Peace Athabasca Delta.
A tailings breach would just be disastrous. And this disaster is becoming more likely every day as governments fail to enforce their already inadequate regulations.
Even without a spill, the tailings ponds offer a deadly resting spot for wildlife, like migratory birds, especially as they replace natural wetland habitat.
Like today, we don't eat as many birds as we used to.
We're seeing increasing mercury in birds and their eggs in the Peace Athabasca Delta. In addition, we're seeing increasing malformations in fish that are probably the result of some of the contaminants in the oil sands.
Things are about to get worse. The world's largest oil sands mine ever is proposed to be built on the park's doorstep.
This latest project is in a watershed that drains into the Wood Buffalo National Park. Right in the most critical migratory route for birds in North America, including endangered whooping crane.
As elders who are deeply connected with the park, we see our delta drying up, threatening the ecosystem. And it is not just the oil sands taking water from our lands.
The delta has never recovered from water loss caused by BC Hydro's Bennett Dam in the 1960s. And now British Columbia and Canada have approved a huge billion-dollar hydroelectric dam on the Peace River, the lifeblood of our delta.
Despite clear threats to the Delta and Wood Buffalo National Park, the Canadian government has not only failed to act, but has recently gutted federal environmental laws.
Canada says they are doing enough to protect the park with a monitoring program called PADM.
Of course, we have the government's PADM studies of the Delta, but all they'll allow us to do is to write a comprehensive obituary.
At the end of the day, PADM just watches our delta die while they are incapable to do anything about it.
The delta ecosystems depend on flooding. Without flooding every few years, they simply dry up. Climate change is already having a major effect on the delta via the flows of the two major rivers, but the big culprits are the developments upstream on the Athabasca and Peace.
This park is my home. I've lived here all my life, and I'd like it to stay healthy for future generations.
Together, these threats are too severe for us to stand by and do nothing. Miksoo needs the support of the international community to protect the Wood Buffalo National Park. How? Kawiti Nanji.
Can we turn it off now, please? Thank you. The floor is open for any other discussion on resolution number 12. Seeing none, we'll move to a vote on resolution number 12. Any abstentions on resolution 12? Seeing none, any objections to resolution 12? We have chief consensus on 2012, resolution 12, and it's passed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'll ask you to turn your attention to on-time draft resolution number 20, First Nations Municipal Community Economic Development Initiative, moved by Chief Michael Laborde, Whispering Pines, Clinton Indian Band, and Chief P.J. Prosper, Pactanek Mi'kmaq Nation. Is Chief Laborde and Chief Prosper available in the Assembly Hall? I did not see them earlier. And if not, may I have a chief or proxy to move and second this resolution number 12? Number 20, sorry, 12 we're by. Chief Bonnie Leonard, to microphone 2.
Hello, Bonnie Leonard. I'm proxy for Chief Barb Cote from the Shuswap Band, and I will move that resolution.
Thank you very much, Chief Leonard. And I see Chief McLeod here from Upper Nicola as a seconder. Chief Harvey McLeod. Got that, David? Okay. And then we've got Okay, good. Thank you. Thank you. All right, so you have it before you, and essentially this one regards a 5-year-old program that is co-delivered by the Council for the Advancement of Native Economic Development Officers, or as we know it, CANDO, which is indigenously controlled and supports community economic development officers in their professional development, and it's co-delivered with the Federation of the Canadian Municipalities and funded through the CIRNA, Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada. Therefore, be it resolved that the chiefs in assembly, once again, I have the timer on for me. So I'm more than happy to hurry, but I do need to get the screen to the therefore be it resolves. Therefore be it resolved that the chiefs in assembly direct the Assembly of First Nations, AFN, to support and advocate for Community Economic Development Initiative as a relevant and valuable program for First Nations economic development. 2, direct the AFN to call upon the federal government, specifically Crown Indigenous Relations Canada, to provide ongoing funding to SETI and future iterations of First Nations Municipal Joint Economic Development Programming, and to provide funding directly to the Council for the Advancement of Native Development Officers as the Indigenous SETI delivery partner. 3, direct the AFN Chiefs Committee on Economic Development to lead the development of a national framework for First Nations Municipal Joint Economic Development and work collaboratively with CANDO and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities to develop the next iteration of SETI. And 4, direct the AFN to advocate that the federal government, specifically CIRC or CIRNA, and provincial governments ensure that complementary funds are contributed by other federal and provincial ministries for the design and establishment of a national framework for First Nations Municipal Joint Economic Development. Is there a need for discussion of Draft Resolution 20? Seeing none, are there any abstentions to Draft Resolution 20? Seeing none, then with your permission, we say that Draft Resolution 20, First Nations Municipal Community Economic Development Initiative, is adopted by consensus. Thank you very much.
Ébauche de résolution numéro 21, appui au tribunal autochtone de Hazelton. Proposeur, Chief Tony Morgan. Is Chief Morgan in the room? Thank you, Chief. Seconded, co-proposeur, Chief Willie Blackwater. Is Chief Blackwater in the room? Thank you. Je vais lire pour ce motif. Pour ce motif, les chefs en assemblée appuient l'approbation, la mise sur pied et le lancement du tribunal autochtone de Hazelton, en joignant à l'Assemblée des Premières Nations de demander respectueusement au gouvernement du Canada d'appuyer l'approbation et la mise sur pied du tribunal autochtone de Hazelton. Préconsitant fortement que le gouvernement fédéral du Canada s'engage à mettre en œuvre la recommandation 31 de la Commission de vérité et réconciliation en fournissant un financement suffisant et stable pour couvrir les coûts de développement, de formation, de lancement et de services continus nécessaires à la réussite du tribunal autochtone de Hazelton. Des fonds sont nécessaires pour le projet suivant. Embaucher un coordinateur pour coordonner et faciliter l'obtention des résultats et comptes en vue d'assurer le succès du processus judiciaire autochtone. Assurer la formation et fournir des services et du soutien aux aînés qui travailleront au tribunal. C. Élaborer et mettre en œuvre des plans de guérison individuels sur les délinquants, les victimes de la communauté. Élaborer des programmes culturels pour traiter les traumatismes et les problèmes de toxicomanie des délinquants. Offrir des ateliers éducatifs portant sur le rôle et les services du tribunal autochtone de Hazelton dans la réserve en collaboration avec les membres, le chef et le conseil. Et F, étudier les lacunes juridiques dans les communautés des réserves qui peuvent avoir une incidence sur le délinquant, la victime et la collectivité, comme la location d'un logement, les droits de la personne, le droit du travail, l'administration des successions et les questions de logement. J'aimerais ouvrir la salle pour discussion sur la résolution numéro 21. Opening the floor for any discussion on Resolution 21. Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. Any abstentions to Resolution 21? Any opposition to Resolution 21? Seeing none, AFN adopts Resolution 21 with consensus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please turn your attention to Draft Resolution 22, support for a national statutory holiday on September 30th, and support for the honoring and recognition ceremony for the Blackwater et al. Plaintiffs, moved by Chief Willie Blackwater and seconded by Chief Karina Lewin. Chief Blackwater and Chief Lewin, I see Chief Blackwater there. Chief Lewin, are you available in the Assembly? There you go. Thank you very much and welcome. Again, this reminds us that one of those benchmark Supreme Court decisions that led to the residential school apology and programs came out of the Blackwater case against the United Church in Port Alberni. Reminds us of TRC Call to Action 80, calling for a federally mandated statutory holiday for a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Notes the support that the Assembly has provided both to that call to action and to Orange Shirt Day, which is celebrated on that day, which came out of the St. Joseph Mission Residential School commemoration in Williams Lake. And also notes that the BC Assembly of First Nations has recently passed or in 2014, also passed resolutions supporting Orange Shirt Day and the National Day to honor survivors of residential school. And as a result, therefore, be it resolved that the chiefs in Assembly reaffirmed the importance of Orange Shirt Day as a national commemorative day for those that attended Indian residential schools, the survivors, the intergenerational survivors, and their families. Support the recognition and honoring of the Blackwater et al. Plaintiffs for their bravery, courage, and sacrifice in their benchmark battle for the Indian residential school settlement and families across Canada. 3, direct the National Chief to call upon the federal government to ensure that the public commemoration of the history and legacy of the Indian residential schools remains a vital component of the reconciliation process. 4, direct the National Chief to call upon the federal government to declare September 30th as a national statutory holiday to honor Indian residential school survivors, their families, and communities. And 5, direct the National Chief to call upon the federal government to work collaboratively and collectively with the Assembly of First Nations to host a national honoring and recognition ceremony for the Blackwater et al. Plaintiffs on Orange Shirt Day, September 30th, 2019 in Vancouver, British Columbia. Is there a need for discussion of this support resolution? Seeing none, let us see, are there any objections to this resolution? Seeing none, are there any abstentions for this resolution? Then, with your permission, ladies and gentlemen, I'll ask you to stand in honor of this resolution to demonstrate your support. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. With your support, this resolution is passed.
Merci, Harold. On va passer à la résolution numéro 24. Soutien à la campagne Moose Hide. Proposeur, Chef Harvey McLeod. Is Mr. Chief McLeod dans la salle? Thank you, Chief. Co-proposeur, Chef Lee Spahan. Chief, oh, thank you very much, Chief. Didn't see you there. I'm obviously blind past this point. Le titre du résolution numéro 24, soutien à la campagne Moose Hide. Je passerai tout de suite à ce Pour ce motif, les chefs en assemblée, 1, soutient pleinement la campagne Moosehead en engageant à mettre fin à la violence faite aux femmes et aux enfants. Enjoigne au chef national de fournir une lettre d'appui à la campagne Moosehead. Demande à tous les ordres du gouvernement et à tous les Canadiens de s'engager à appuyer la campagne Moosehead et de porter l'épinglette Moosehead pour symboliser leur engagement à mettre fin à la violence faite aux femmes et aux enfants. 4. Presse tous les ordres du gouvernement à veiller à ce que des ressources adéquates soient fournies aux organisations autochtones qui travaillent de façon proactive pour mettre fin à la violence faite aux femmes et aux enfants autochtones. Et 5. Enjoignant à l'Assemblée des Premières Nations de collaborer avec la campagne Moosehead et d'autres organismes aux vues similaires pour faire en sorte que toutes les provinces, territoires et les gouvernements du Canada fassent des progrès dans la lutte contre la violence faite aux femmes et aux enfants autochtones. J'aimerais ouvrir la salle pour discussion sur la résolution 24. En voyant pas de discussion, on va passer tout de suite à notre décision. Any opposed to resolution number 24? Any abstentions to resolution 24? Anyone against resolution 24? Seeing none, resolution 24 is passed by consensus. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to announce that all of the on-time resolutions are now complete. But you can't go home just yet. Turns out we have a few, about 20 late resolutions. Noting that the delegate from Papas-Chase is not in the assembly, we will continue in the order that we have until he arrives. Let us turn to late draft resolution 32. Non-insured health benefits, ongoing commitment to a joint process. Chief Sheldon Kent, Black River First Nation. Chief Irvin Bull, Louis Bull First Nation. I did see Chief Bull here. Chief Kent, are you available? Not seeing Chief Kent. If not, may I have another chief to move this resolution? Chief Craig Mackinac. Thank you very much. Got it? Yep, Chief Mackinac. Thank you very much. So this resolution is in the context, of course, of the UN Declaration and the TRC calls to action and the recent transfer of the First Nations and Inuit Health Branch from Health Canada to Indigenous Service Canada, and follows up on resolution, a 2012 resolution where the AFN and FNIB had undertaken a joint review of the non-insured health benefits program, and set to be complete in this coming year with a final report that will include joint recommendations on each benefit area within the non-insured health benefit program and a review of operational and administrative issues, which we know many of us have struggled to find more flexibilities. Given that, therefore, be it resolved that the chiefs in assembly call on the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada and the First Nations and Inuit Health Branch to continue to fully and meaningfully engage with the Assembly of First Nations and First Nations for the ongoing improvement of the non-insured health benefits program that is responsive to the high rates of illness and diseases in First Nations, changing health priorities, growing population, and the on-the-ground realities. 2, call on the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada and FNIHB to initiate a conversation with the AFN and First Nations on a pathway moving forward for health transformation, including a transformative approach to NIHB. 3, call for a formalized process that is jointly determined by FNIB and the AFN and First Nations in the spring of 2019 with a terms of reference that clearly states the purpose of the group and its roles and responsibilities as part of the long-term approach beyond the joint review process. including considerations for supporting health transformation and the transformation of NIHB. 4, call on the Minister of Indigenous Services Canada to commit resources to the AFN and First Nations to support the capacity required to ensure ongoing work related to NIHB is adequately resourced and to provide First Nations with the ability to seek independent advice and content expertise as required. Is there a need for discussion of this late resolution? Seeing none, are there any abstentions for this resolution? Seeing none, then may we say that all here are in favor by consensus of adopting late draft resolution 32. Thank you, 32. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you, Harold. Merci, Harold. On va passer tout de suite à la prochaine item sur notre ordre du jour. We'll move to our next agenda item, which is a concurrent dialogue session, which won't be concurrent anymore. It'll be now here in the plenary. We'll move to fiscal relations. I'd like to invite Paul, Richard, and Dan to the front.
Call them forward.
Yeah.
And then Papa's Chase is here, so we'll do that.
Okay. We'll pass to one more resolution, seeing that we do have a new delegate, and then we'll jump right into the fiscal relation conversation.
Michael? Okay. And just before we get this started, we do want to move to late draft resolution 35, support for Papaschase First Nation AFN membership. Moved by Chief Billy Moran, Enoch Cree Nation, seconded by Conroy Sewapegaham from Little Red River Cree Nation. Chief Moran, Chief Sewapegaham, are you available in the assembly? Chief here, second chief. Second chief. Thank you very much. Welcome, gentlemen. This just notes that the Papaschase First Nations signed the adhesion to Treaty 6 in August of 1877, and that over the course of the years, they were forcibly removed from Reserve 136 and forced to join other bands, such as Enoch, Alexander, and Musqueam. That in 1999, the Papaschase people themselves began to self-determine and reorganize themselves and elected a chief and council in that year. It also reminds us that in 1995, the Confederacy of Treaty 6 provided a resolution in support of their work on their land claim, and in 2005, the chiefs and assemblies here passed our resolution to support the landless bands, and then also noting that the chiefs of Alberta have recently passed in 2014 support for the full recognition of Papaschase First Nation, supporting them in that. So therefore, be it resolved that the chiefs in assembly support Papaschase First Nation in its quest to right past wrongs and once again achieve full recognition by Canada as a First Nation, and 2, accept the Papaschase First Nation as a member of the Assembly of First Nations. Is there a need for the discussion of this resolution? Seeing none, are there any abstentions? Seeing none, then the membership of Papaschase First Nation in the Assembly of First Nation is unanimously supported.
Chief Bruno? Chiefs, thank you so much for that support. Unanimous. Chief Calvin Bruno, if you want to come up here, please, and Chief Billy Moran from the Enoch Cree Nation, and your support. And now that it's officially being done, you're going to replace that black lanyard you got with a nice bright red orange one here. So he's going to be one of our chiefs in assembly. So welcome to the Assembly of First Nations, Papaschase Chief Bruno. Now he's going to move and second all the resolutions, he says. No. But Chief, thank you so much, and welcome to our assembly. Chief, you want to say a few words? Sure. A few brief words? Go ahead.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's a great honor and privilege to be here amongst all you nations and people from different territories. I thank you for your acceptance and your acknowledgement. It's been a long struggle, and we're very proud to be here today. as a member of the Assembly of First Nations and recognized as another nation. We're taking a rightful place as a Treaty 6 nation and reasserting and establishing our sovereignty, self-determination, self-governance. And we're here to stay. We're here to work with you. Hi, hi.
Hey, hey. Right on. Thanks, guys. Good job. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Dave. Yeah, keep on. Good job, guys.
I'd like to invite the National Chief to introduce our next topic for discussion.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This next topic is fiscal. And you remember we had a National Forum Chiefs Committee fiscal table. And their good work has been done now. It's been finished. But there's a new task team that's been put together that's still working towards, in the words of the Prime Minister, long-term, sustainable, predictable funding. And we know the background to this is that your current contributions agreements that you sign as chiefs, as nations and tribes, aren't nation to nation. They're not transfers between governments. They're contribution agreements. And we know the FSO will come out January, February and say, hey, chief, sign this contribution agreement or there's no funding come April 1. And so we identified that as an issue years back. And so we brought together a Chiefs Committee on Fiscal. We signed the MOU with Carol Bennett a few years back to get something moving in terms of a movement away from contribution agreements. And so through that work at that Chiefs Committee on Fiscal table, there was a couple of developments, two key developments really, and one of them was a transfer from one fiscal year to the next. Remember February, March Madness it used to be called? When you have federal monies and if you don't spend them by March, you lose them. That's gone because now you can transfer over. And so there's going to be some better planning, long-range strategic planning done. So that was a policy change. And that was from the lobbying from the Chiefs Committee on Fiscal table. The other one was the 10-year transfers. And I don't want to use grants because we're trying to move towards transfers between governments. And so I want to use that terminology. So there is 10-year transfers now available. And that's going to help facilitate a greater ability to leverage monies. It's some opportunities. Not everybody wants that, and that's fine. But it's an option. So there were two things coming out of that old Chiefs Committee on Fiscal table. And so that work was done. And so now there's a new committee that's still going to follow up from the direction from the last committee. And so this committee is made up of the old Chiefs Committee, but it's not called the Chiefs Committee on Fiscal anymore for the AFN. It's a joint committee with government and these people on it. So on this committee, Chief Richard Sidney, Richard Nearsu is up here, Chief David Jimmy, Chief Lee Crowchild, Vice Chief Heather Bear, Chief Connie Lazore, John G. Paul. We also have Chief Christian Sinclair, Chief Laurie Carr, Kevin Page, Don Drummond, Harold Calla, Terry Goodtrack, and Bonnie Healy. And so they have rotating chairs. And so they're going to keep working towards something we've asked them to do. Come up with a new arrangement with the Crown based on 4 or 5 key elements. 1, the new arrangement should be based on total population, on and off the reserve. Got to be based on total population. Number 2, keep up with inflation, CPI. Nothing has been ever kept up with inflation. 3, base it on needs. 4, treaty-based funding. 5, and this is the key one, percentage of land and resources, or percentage of GDP. All these factors have to be looked at, and we wanted them to be in this new fiscal relationship with the Crown. And so those are elements, and so this working team has to work very hard. And it's good to see a rep from the Crown here, Mr. Paul Topple. It's good to see him here. He's a hard worker, and he tries to be as flexible as he can. And he says, Chief, I'll get this done in a couple of days. No, he didn't say that. but it's just something we've got to keep pushing forward. So this committee has met once now, twice, and they have rotating chairs. So this is my introduction, because it used to be my old portfolio. I don't chair these people anymore. They're on their own. So they're going to keep working it through their system based on those 4 or 5 key elements. So with that, who's the first speaker? Mr. Dan is the technician. He works for the AFN. I forget what department now, Dan. Just kidding. Come on up. Do some more reporting. But that's the background, chiefs. It's a work in progress. Come on.
Oh. And, oh, there was supposed to be a clicker box. Oh, thank you. And there we go. Kwe, my name is Dan Wilson. Thank you, National Chief. I'm the AFN staff lead on the new fiscal relationship. Please allow me to begin by acknowledging the Drum, the Algonquin Nation, for their welcome, elders, chiefs, delegates. Because our time is short, I will provide a very quick overview of our work, and then I'll turn to Richard Narasu, our Northwest Territories representative on the Joint Advisory Committee on Fiscal Relations, for a few words from the perspective of the committee. And also here, as the National Chief mentioned, for the question period is Paul Topple, the Chief Financial and Results Delivery Officer from Indigenous Services Canada. So, at a high level, this is where we came from, where we are, and where we're going. We all know there's a huge gap in the quality of life and that it needs to close. So we are working closely with the Indigenous Services Canada to find ways, as National Chief mentioned, 2016 at the AGA that summer, he and Minister Bennett signed a memorandum of understanding to pursue this work. We put the structures in place to guide us through that period, and we went out across the country to hear from you in Regional Link about what the challenges were and what the possible solutions might be. That led to our report at the Special Chiefs Assembly last December. We submitted our joint report, and through Resolution 66, 2017, you told us to create a 10-year grant or transfer, as the National Chief says, to repeal the failed default prevention and management policy, to repeal the First Nations Financial Transparency Act, and to create a joint advisory committee to administer the policy framework, and on recommendations to support First Nation governance. And so, what did we do? Well, we created the committee, as the National Chief said. They've met twice now, in 3 times if you count the initial telephone call with the minister to set it up. And they are now meeting regularly. We've created a 10-year grant, which will be in place for April 1st of 2019, and we believe quite firmly that we will surpass the original target we set of 100 First Nations participating in that grant for this April. We also are putting supports in place so that others who are interested for April 1st of 2020 and moving forward will be able to participate. We have a recommendation with regard to how to repeal the default prevention and management policy near ready, but we know that we need to engage and validate that with you to make sure that we get it right, and so that will happen. And we have a commitment from Canada on the repeal of the Financial Transparency Act when new governance supports are ready, and in the meantime, we have a firm commitment that there will be no enforcement of the FNFTA. Looking forward, the Joint Advisory Committee on Fiscal Relations will provide advice to the National Chief and Minister Philpott on or before April 1st of 2019. We'll be looking for recommendations for a new fiscal policy framework, transfer mechanism, funding to catch up and keep up, how to support revenue generation, and as the National Chief says, that funding must keep up with inflation, must apply to your whole population, must truly meet needs, must be based in treaty, and reflect our fair share of the wealth of this land. They will also be providing advice on how to support First Nation governments with capacity investments, First Nation-led institutions, and other services. To conclude, it's important to note that what we are working on right now are not endpoints, but they are interim steps on the way to a healthier fiscal relationship, to the funding that you need and have a right to support your own economies and the results that you want to deliver for your people, because that is how we will close the gap. There is much more to do, and we anticipate a lot more engagement with you as we move this forward. But for now, I'd like to turn to Richard to say a few words on behalf of the committee and Walalia.
Thank you. Well, first of all, merci trop, hai trop to all the Dinjiju in Hekai, in this room, in our language. That's to all the descendants of the people, and to all the chiefs. First of all, I want to acknowledge and I'm honored to be on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and to address the chiefs, leaders of the Assembly of First Nations. I know that I wanted to say, and on behalf of the working group, I want to pay my respects to Elder Elmer Couchet, send our condolences to his family, his home First Nation, to the Manitoba First Nation leaders and to his colleagues on the Elders Council, and to many of his lifelong friends. National Chiefs, elders, youth, veterans, National Executive, special guests, and Dinjiju who are in this room. My colleague, Chief David Jimmy, who is sitting in the BC delegation, are pleased to be here. This fiscal relationship and any changes or initiatives are now a joint collaborative effort and partnership that needs to redefine and improve the fiscal relations and acknowledge the nation-to-nation relationship that is so important. While I understand the need to manage our expectations, I believe that it is an opportunity for the First Nations to lead and to propose transformational solutions to the way in which our First Nations receive, raise, and share in the benefit of the resources in our homelands and within this country that is called Canada. While our focus in our working group will be to discuss and consider and propose innovative and proactive solutions in our fiscal relationship with and within Canada, we acknowledge that we cannot do this work without consulting, engaging, and receiving the advice, input, contribution of the leadership of our First Nations. Your direction and input is not only important, it is necessary and required. We cannot see success in our work without you as our leaders and chiefs in providing support, and in the final analysis, your approval. I can tell you that members that you have chosen or recommended have begun our work recognizing that treaties matter and are the foundations of our discussions. However, the working group acknowledged we are not charged with addressing the inherent and treaty rights of a First Nation That is your responsibility as our chiefs and leaders. I can also say the working group has received excellent support from the National Chief, the Executive Council, staff of the Assembly of First Nation, along with the officials of the Government of Canada. Your team of selected chiefs, leaders, and officials intend to work hard and respect always where we come from, whose life we are trying to improve today, and more importantly, children that are unborn. We all acknowledge that we cannot manage or have our people live in poverty, or that we are first peoples to be considered as a problem to be solved. We acknowledge that you as leaders in our communities, along with our regions, must be given the resources to ensure the well-being of your people and to give hope, along with the opportunity for success for your people. I believe we have that opportunity to take on the leadership that is required to make the transformational change. Sometimes that is, quote, picking the low-hanging fruit, as the National Chief often states, and contributing and proposing long-term solutions and lasting changes. That is transformational and very significant. And therefore, I am asking the chiefs, the national leadership, First Nations leaders, First Nations experts to assist us. Give us your advice, share your knowledge, provide your guidance. We need it, we require it. I accept that you may have some skepticism, but historical efforts have not resulted in the outcomes of previous efforts. But we need you. So the committee, the working committee, remains committed to consulting with our chiefs and to seek your advice and counsel. I thank you. I want to say again, thank you to the National Chief for the effort that you've undertaken, and to the Executive Council, and to all the chiefs for supporting that effort. Masi cho, hai cho, merci.
Questions? No. Paul's just going to take questions.
I'd like to open the floor for any questions. Issues, concerns? Microphone number 2.
Dan George, Chief of the Burns Lake Band. I'm on the Chiefs Committee on Housing Infrastructure, and every time we talk to the Northwest Territories, they've got a unique situation there where all the money and all the funding goes to the government. I'm wondering if you guys can find some way to give them the money, because we talk about housing and they have no control over their money. So I'm just here to help my brothers up in the north, and asking if you could find some avenue to give them some money. Thank you.
English, Chief. You can speak from there. Mike to my right here.
Thank you.
You should be good. Mike to my right here.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and Masi Cho, for raising the issue. I just want you to know that it is one of those issues that was actually raised as an item of discussion and consideration on the working group already, and it's not only housing, it's actually all the issues on the way in which First Nation funding is received in the Northwest Territories. And it is a matter that we're going to discuss. It's a matter our hope is to change, that relationship is between Canada and the First Nations in the Northwest Territories. Thank you very much.
Microphone number 1.
The concern that I have is that the formulas are currently underfunded to First Nations, so that's why a lot of First Nations are not going for the 10-year grant. Because the formulas, especially the larger your population is, the less funding you receive per capita. So if you have several thousand members, you've got a real serious funding issue. And if the government doesn't fund 100% of the need that's there, particularly in housing and water and stuff, it's going to cause a lot of infighting among the chiefs. And so how do you propose to overcome that eventuality with this new funding arrangement? Because we know right well the government's not going to fund 100% of the need across the whole country. It's too big.
Microphone to my right.
Thank you, Bert.
Far right.
Thank you very much, Chief Merico, for the question. We acknowledge the state of the underfunding that exists for the various programs, including housing. As you may know, for the last 3 federal budgets, $17 billion has been put into Indigenous peoples, but we acknowledge that's only a beginning and much more needs to be done. And we are busy working on what are the possibilities for further investment in federal 2019. At the working group level, we have talked about escalators and to go beyond the 2%. So in order to ensure, as the National Chief said, that you are getting inflation-protected, cost-protected kind of growth in funding, that is also in play. Should provide a note that the grant or whatever is the funding agreement model is different from the formulas. Grant does not impact the formulas, rather for small or large. Grant is an opportunity for enhancements only.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Microphone number 1.
Chief Elaine Johnson, Serpent River First Nation in Ontario. I do have a question in regards to the committee in regard the 10-year grant. I thought this was going to be easier for First Nations, but it's actually more complex to even get into the 10-year grant. And I've talked to some First Nations because we were looking at it and saying, we got all these hoops to even look at that. And so, you know, it sounds like a good thing, but it's not necessarily a good thing if you don't have all your ducks in a row. And so my question for the committee is there an evaluation or a survey or something as to why First Nations would not participate in the 10-year grant, and the issues that they're experiencing of even considering the 10-year grant? Because I understand that, you know, the reason that we were looking at this, but if it's not going to meet our needs, then why are we doing it? So I guess that's my question. What kind of evaluation or process to be able to allow First Nations to say what their concerns are in regards to this 10-year grant?
Thank you, Chief. Paul? Far right.
Thank you very much, Chief, for the question. So there will be evaluations done over the life of the 10-year grant, which will be able to seek feedback from First Nations on those who have received the grant, and also to receive feedback from those First Nations who are not in the grant, so that we can improve on it going forward. We have received 250 expressions of interest from First Nations across the country. We are overwhelmed with the amount of interest that those 250 First Nations have expressed in terms of interest to want to have access to the 10-year grant.
Thank you. Microphone number 1.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Chief Ignace Gulda Adwapskat, First Nation National Chief. I've been listening here for the last 3 days. That's just so many issues that we need to deal with, outstanding issues. And, you know, when you talk about reconciliation, this kind of stuff that's being thrown around, you know, there's a price tag attached to everything, including the apology that was mentioned just a while ago. Apology is nothing. You know, there's a price tag to everything. Our people have been living in poverty for so many years. You know, the most one of the most basic things in life that we need in order to be healthy. A roof over our heads, a safe drinking water, and the infrastructure that we all need to better the lives of our people and our future generations. You heard my colleague, Upstream First Nation, Chief Wayne Munias from Niskanega, who was a very eloquent speaker talking about this community that has been in boil water advisory for 25 years. You know, that in this day and age, that's not acceptable. You need to do something more than just what you're talking about here. I'm not sure the details of the fiscal relationship, whatever it looks like. You mentioned about 100 First Nations that want to participate. There are 640 First Nations across Canada who are screaming for the same thing. You know, so you got to do something. We can't wait another 10 years or 20 years. Something's got to happen, because we're talking about all the social issues that are stemming from overcrowding. And I'm from a remote community, a fly-in community. And that's more expensive to do business up there. And we have no other means of access. So when we come to this assembly, we're totally lost because our voices haven't been heard. And I want that thing to change. I want to see something to happen, not later. Good.
Anyone want to contribute to that one? Microphone number 2.
Thank you. Good afternoon to the Assembly. Just with regards to this, this file, you know, I heard the gentleman up there on my far left, he talked about 17 billion. You know, that's all paper budget. I think what we should do fiscally is focus on what's the rollout of this money. Where is the money? When does the money get to where it's needed? Not on paper sitting in the vault here in Ottawa. It's about cracking the vault, getting the money rolling. So 17 billion sounds good, but when you look at it, it's not flowing, it's not rolling out. So that's I think a mechanism. What can you do? Because 17 billion helps this government because they announced the hell out of it, but it doesn't flow. So that's the key. What's that mechanism? What's that rollout function? That's what I think the experts should focus on. The second one I wanted to raise is the cap. We're dancing all around this, all that. The cap's still not lifted. And Trudeau, I'm glad he comes here. I'm glad, and I thank Perry for that. At least we have these people coming here. Then I was harping, well, they need to listen to us, so they're doing that now. So, but now it's to keep advancing, right? So we're getting them here, they're listening, they're hearing, now to keep advancing. So the first thing is the cap. What are we doing in this committee with this authority to co-develop or whatever we're doing to get that cap lifted? Because right there, that's a challenge. So that's what I'll say, Perry. Thank you.
Microphone to far right.
Thank you very much for the question, Chief. In terms of the money flowing and whether the money is flowing at all, in the case of infrastructure, there is a publicly available infrastructure interactive map, and it has, by First Nation community, all the projects that you can see that are happening across this country. And so I would encourage you to look at that infrastructure interactive map, because the money is flowing, and you will see all those projects by First Nation community for evidence of that. In terms of the cap that's being lifted, we have recognized that the working group, that work has to be done on that. A lot of technical assessments have been done on what is that appropriate escalator that National Chief has urged us to do that is beyond the 2. And the minister has acknowledged that and has put in a request to have that considered for the national budget, and we will see whether we are successful in that. So it is an acknowledgement by the working group that more needs to be done in that regard. Also, the one benefit from whether the cash is flowing is that for those who are the recipients of the grant, you will get your grant portion of your funding all at the beginning of the first year for that year. So you won't get periodic cash flow payments. You get all your money for that year at the beginning of the fiscal year, which is a very positive cash flow opportunity for First Nations.
Thank you, Paul. Microphone number 2. Microphone number 2.
Good afternoon. Chief Willie Blackwater. Could you go? British Columbia. One of the things that I, speaking on behalf of our community, is that, you know, it seems like we're put in a pressure point to sign a BCR for this 10-year grant. And yet when they did presentations for different First Nations in our area and Terrace, we asked all kinds of questions to get more clarification, and we weren't provided answers. So you're putting in this 10-year grant, and you don't even have all your ducks in a row of how it's going to work, and yet you're putting it for us, and it seems like all you're trying to do is trying to get numbers to sign on it. You know, and reason why we have this concern is that, you know, we live in the northern BC, and our access to resources is very minimum. And to get these resources, it costs a lot of money. And so we're one of those First Nations that proudly got out a third party, which we've been in for about 2 decades, right? Then now you want to throw this money at us with no resources of how to handle it. And we're doing that now, right? That's the reason why we moved out as third party into recipient point. But, you know, it just baffles me why this 10-year grant has been offered, and yet there's no dialogue and no educational awareness of how that's going to be formulated and stuff like that, right? Because one of the questions I asked in the terrace thing is a 10-year grant, right? So it's 10 years. I said, well, we get the whole lump of money in the 10 years in all one lump. Then is it what you just said? No, it's on a yearly basis. So why are you calling it a 10-year grant when you just give it on a yearly basis? Because our immediate thought was, oh, we can make you know, interest on the grant that we have, stuff like that. But you know, it's just a mixed message that you're sending us and stuff like that. And it seems like you're putting a lot of pressure on First Nations to do that. But we opted out until maybe, well, think about it, we may do it next year. But we opted out this year because of that, right? Because there's uncertainty. There's no concrete information of how that's going to roll out. Thank you.
Microphone to my far right.
Chief, thank you very much for the question. So the grant and programs that are covered in the grant are coming in 2 weeks. And that will enable those to solidify whether they're interested or not. There is no forcing of this grant. There are benefits associated with the grant. If First Nations want to take advantage of those benefits, they are welcome to do so. If the government doesn't meet its target, I know that we are very comfortable not meeting it. This is only an aspirational and is up to each First Nation based on advancing on their self-determination path whether they want to take the opportunity to take advantage of those benefits or not. What we heard from First Nation community members loud and clear across the country last fall was that they wanted predictability, and the 10 years gives them predictability, and First Nation community members across the country wanted flexibility, and the grant also gives them that. And so that's what we are trying to offer through this 10-year grant, in order to respond to what First Nation community members across the country wanted.
Thank you, Paul. Microphone number 2.
Thank you. Harold Prince, Councillor for Nacazli Woodden, British Columbia. First, let me acknowledge the unceded territory with the Algonquin people. I'm honored to be here. Our First Nation are considering the 10-year package. One question that we had was if you mentioned flexibility, and if First Nation is interested in this 10-year package, if it doesn't fit their criteria or not working out for them, can they revert back to the five-year block funding? Thank you.
Microphone on my far right.
Thank you very much, Chief, for that question. So from our perspective, the grant provides upside if, for whatever reason, the community does not want to avail itself of the grant. And you can go back to the existing funding agreement that is currently in front of you.
Thank you, Paul. Microphone number 2.
Chief McEnroe from Mermans. Can I just had a question? Reading previous material on fiscal relations and this 10-year grant, I guess one of my questions from treaty-based funding, when we talk about it, and reading the First Nations, I guess that financial...
Sorry. Sorry, we just got a bunch of feedback there. Maybe we could start over. Sorry, Chief, but we were having a hard time hearing you with this feedback.
Okay. I just had a question. It's in regards to information that was brought out previously on fiscal relations, and it's regard to treaty-based funding, because I know when we were looking at that during this year and how this was rolling out earlier in the year, and it was leading you towards the Financial Management Act and other acts that the government is proposing. So if you're not going to be part of this 10-year grant, and then you're trying to use treaty-based funding to, like a lot of us are on 3-year or 5-year grants, or not grants, but CFAs, I don't want to say grants. So, you know, the bands that are doing that, I think would rather use that approach, because we're not certain, I guess, to see when, you know, you're talking about these 10-year grants, and what a lot of us were worried about is you do these 10-year grants, you're going towards municipal status and self-government. So that's where a lot of questions that we have. So, you know, just some observations I have, and, you know, hopefully, you know, you can take the treaty-based funding into your considerations and you sit down as a committee, because, you know, I think if you can answer that question and have an answer for that down the road for a lot of the chiefs here, I think they'll be comfortable in which way they want to go, because whether you go 3-year, 5-year, or 10-year, because I know being previously on the executive, you know, you read all this information, and some of the things I read was there was always opt-in or opt-out clauses, you know, in all these agreements or acts that are coming up. So just some observations, you know, and, you know, if you can look at that, especially the treaty-based funding, and work around that.
Thank you, Chief. Yep. We'll go to the last question. We have time for one more intervention. We'll get a response from the panel, and then we'll move on. Microphone number 2.
Bonnie Leonard, I'm proxy for Chief Barb Cote from the Shuswap Indian Band. I'd like to acknowledge the Algonquin Nation and thank them for allowing us to meet in their territory. I just wanted to shout out to the fiscal group and thank you for your work you're doing on this file. It's really important to all of us. Tribal councils are not part of this 10-year plan. As far as I know, the 10-year agreements are not going to be available to tribal councils, and I'd like for the group to look into that a bit more and see if you can push that envelope for us. We need that stability at that level as well, and I think that would be helpful. I also wanted to just thank the National Chief for assisting our nation with arranging a meeting with Minister Freeland on Monday in Toronto. I really appreciate the efforts you made on our behalf when I reached out and said, hey, we need this meeting in regards to the Columbia River Treaty. It was great that you did that for us, as well as thank you for bringing in all of the different ministers and the Prime Minister for this 3-day meeting to share out their somewhat platforms on some of them and just their viewpoints on our relationship. And I think it was really helpful to have them here and have them accessible for our chiefs to ask questions directly. Cooksjam.
Thank you. We have time for one more intervention, and then we'll move on, please. Microphone number 2.
Yeah.
Yeah, Size Hakache, Lee Crowchild. Thank you for allowing me to be on this committee. As one of those committee members, I feel it's a responsibility for me to actually say something. This 10-year agreement, from how I understand it, is what I would caution a lot of the chiefs here is don't accept everything for what it is. I mean, we don't want to be stuffing hay up a dead horse's ass here because it's not going to happen, you know. But we do have to look beyond 10 years. What's going to happen after 10 years? Because you're going to be collecting statistics on how funding goes, you know, and for those nations that are more successful, that's going to skew the results. And I say that because I'm Tsotena. We have certainly an agenda we're following, and if they use our results by themselves, it's going to skew anything. So what is beyond 10 years? You know, and maybe one thing I'm going to throw out here is maybe it means that we entertain constitutional talks, really look at Section 35, and we really have to define what it is as us, as the people of the land, because we're defining ourselves by the rules and regulations of this sitting government of Canada itself. You know, we're defining ourselves by, we're letting treaty define us. We're letting new treaties define us. We're letting the Constitution define us. But we haven't really defined who we are. So beyond 10 years, maybe we got to start looking at, we got to enter into constitutional talks. Because we all come forward here as chiefs, as people of the land, we bring our tobacco. And when we bring that, that's the truth. That's our Constitution. And those of those on the prairie who's our chief's pipes, that's the truth. We can't lie. And I'm standing here and I'm not lying to any of you here. We have a long ways to go on this. But we do need your support. We do need your voice. We do need your input. It's easy to accuse people of not doing enough or being sellouts. But on this committee, those people that are sitting on that committee, they are really working hard, and this is a big discussion. You know, the Minister Philpott really did say to us, be creative. Be creative what the future looks like. And I think that's the messaging I'm getting from on top here, and that's the way we have to go. So even though I used a very creative analogy, it's true. Don't stuff horse up a dead horse's ass because it's not going to do anything. It's gone. And we're still going to try and do that. Think beyond the 10 years, where we need to go. See us, guys. Thank you.
Any last comments from the panel? Yeah, a couple. Okay.
Yeah. Well, very quickly, I don't have much more to add to what Chief Crowchild mentioned. I can say to you one thing, that the whole matter of the treaties is an issue of importance to us. Chief Connie Lazor, Chief Crowchild, Vice Chief Heather Bear, Chief Laurie Carr, all have raised those issues, and we will address them. On the matter of the Tribal Council funding, thank you for raising it. We hadn't thought about it, but thank you very much. I think that we will address that. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank our panel. Let's give them a hand for coming up here and clarifying what their roles and responsibilities are moving forward. With that, we'll move to our next agenda item and invite Harold up.
Thank you. We'll turn to some of our resolutions, please. I'll ask the Assembly to please turn to late draft resolution 33, First Nations Child Development and Wellbeing Longitudinal Study. Moved by Grand Chief Abram Benedict from Mohawk Council of Akwesasne and Chief Val Riche, Atikameksheng Anishinaabeg. Grand Chief Benedict, Chief Riche, are you available in the Assembly? I see Chief Riche here. I didn't see him earlier. May we have someone to stand in as the mover of this resolution on First Nations Child Development and Wellbeing, a longitudinal study? Microphone 1.
Chief Larry Rock, Wanapate First Nation.
Sorry, hear that again?
Chief Larry Rock, Wanapate First Nation.
Thank you very much, Chief Rock. You have a resolution there in the context of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission UN Declaration and the recent decision of the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal on First Nations Child and Family Services. It notes the availability of only one national data collection system in the Canadian, it's called the Canadian Incidence Study, and it identifies the Adverse Child Experiences Study, which was developed in the United States as a longitudinal study that is really good at identifying the impact of adverse effects of childhood trauma on the health and social conditions of individuals. It reminds us of some of the gaps that we see when we're trying to address this and the role of longitudinal studies in assessing those impacts. Therefore, be it resolved that the Chiefs in Assembly call on the First Nations Information Governance Center to produce a paper on the feasibility of conducting the longitudinal study of First Nations child development and well-being based on the Adverse Child Experiences Study, which accounts for structural inequalities and cultural and linguistic needs of First Nations children and youth. And 2, call on Canada to provide funding for the feasibility study and commit to long-term investments for a multi-year longitudinal study of First Nations child development and well-being. Is there a need for discussion of this support resolution? Seeing none, and having the question being suggested. Grand Chief Abram, as Benedict has arrived. Thank you very much for that. Then he called the question? Technically, he can do that. He's not officially the mover at this point, but that's very impressive strategy. So with that, let us move to the vote then. Are there any abstentions to draft resolution 33? Seeing none, are there any objections? Seeing none, let's congratulate the mover, the seconder, and the strategist for their successful passage by consensus of that resolution. Okay. Let us move to resolution 34, modern treaties, moved by Chief Roberta Joseph, I see present here, and Chief President Les Dorion. Les, are you available in the Assembly Hall? I see you there, and you're going to remind me later how to say that community name that you've got there in your language. I appreciate that. Both being present. This notes that Yukon and British Columbia First Nations with modern treaty agreements wish to continue collaborating and working cooperatively with the AFN to advance priorities and interests. And they really emphasize that this is done within the context of the unique constitutional and legal status, jurisdictions, and powers contained within their agreements, and note that this is further to previous Assembly resolutions calling for a modern day treaty implementation group and a recent AFN Executive Committee motion affirming support for the implementation group itself. So therefore, be it resolved that the Chiefs in Assembly direct the Assembly of First Nations to fully support Yukon and British Columbia First Nations self-government issues and priorities and work collaboratively with Yukon and British Columbia First Nations on the following priorities. A, the full implementation of the Yukon and British Columbia First Nations land claim and self-government agreements, including furthering 1, a renewed fiscal relationship with Canada and the Yukon government. 2, the forgiveness of the loans, interest payable related to Yukon and British Columbia treaty agreements. 3, the revision of federal policies to reflect that Yukon First Nations are northern peoples off reserve and have unique jurisdictions, powers, and responsibilities under the Yukon First Nations modern treaty agreements. 2, direct the AFN to seek resources to support the creation of an AFN modern treaty implementation group mandated to increase advocacy on modern treaty implementation and to pressure the federal government to honor their obligations to implement modern treaties in accordance with their spirit and intent. And 3, direct the AFN Modern Treaty Implementation Group to provide yearly progress updates on the work being undertaken by the Modern Treaty Implementation Group to the Chiefs in Assembly and to the AFN National Executive Committee as required. Is there a need for discussion of this resolution 34? See, over here, Cookby Wilson, microphone 2.
Chief Judy Wilson, Union BC Indian Chiefs. Many of our members are outside the treaty process, so I see in number E it defines who the ones are speaking to in this resolution. I just wanted to make sure it was in the therefore it be resolved, so because it's not all BC First Nations are involved in the treaty process, so I wanted to make that change and clarification.
Okay. And so just to remind, where are you looking for something?
In E it defines who this group is for the treaties and self-government. It should be also included in therefore it be resolved, because it just says Yukon and BC First Nations, but there has to have that distinction, because there's many of us in BC that are outside the treaty process.
Yep, so just under one then, to fully support Yukon and British Columbia First Nations with modern treaty agreements.
Yeah, or those involved in the processes, or
Yeah.
because many of us are not.
Yeah, so involved in the process. And then it's clear by the context. All right, just look to the mover and seconder to see if it's okay to just add that phrase, essentially after the first line, after one, fully support Yukon and British Columbia First Nations involved in the process on their self-government issues and priorities. Seconder, microphone 2.
Oklahoma, Huxam Kus. My name is Les Dorn, my Indian name. I was just given the other day. So I want to come up and just say a couple things. The first thing that I want to say is that I've been traveling the country working on, for our people, working on the treaty, because that's what I inherited as the leader. And what I wanted to say is that the same thing I said in Halifax last week, to all of our Indigenous communities, to all of our ancestors, to all of the people that are out there that are listening, is that we need to get along and we need to work together. We need to be compatible with one another. We need to reconcile amongst ourselves and not be eating each other up and being bullying or lateral violence or pushing each other around. We need to work together, and this AFN needs to do the work for us. And I think that we're headed in the right direction, but we need to pull together. And we can't continuously fight amongst ourselves. I've heard a couple things yesterday here from one of the people, and I go, and it's disrespectful. The ancestors of the Algonquin were probably rolling over yesterday just with the lack of respect that was at this table. And I think that we need to get back to that. The way that our ancestors were, all of us, no matter where you're from. I'm from Ythluathut. That's Yukluit First Nation, Ythluathut. And on the complete other side of the west coast of Vancouver Island. And I go, and be respectful to one another. That's what our ancestors were. Let's get back to that.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I just wanted to note, I want to look to Chief Joseph and President Dorion to accept that friendly amendment to just focus on those involved in the process on their self-government issues. Yes, for the mover. Les, okay with these additional words? Yes, thank you very much. Comment on microphone 2 to the amended resolution.
Yeah, just Chief Curtis Dickey from Fort Nelson First Nation. We're situated in the northeast corner of British Columbia, and our relatives to the east of us are in treaty negotiations, and we haven't had a sit down with them council to council to discuss overlap issues. Not sure that previous leadership prior to me never made that a priority, but I think I don't know if it should be put in the wording somewhere about having financial support for us to sit down and start those discussions and put some of those old overlap issues to bed, because we want to move on to other things, and we recognize that there is shared territory. So I think having something like that in there might be beneficial for us to mend that relationship and to move on as partners and as relatives. So I just wanted to make that comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do want to go back briefly to the mover and seconder. Just the resolution committee has recommended a bit better wording. They just say to just change that first sentence, say direct the Assembly of First Nations to fully support Yukon and British Columbia First Nations involved in modern treaty and self-government issues and priorities, so that it narrows it to those First Nations as Cookby has asked. So I just want to note if that's okay with the mover and the seconder. Good. Microphone 2, Cookby Wilson.
Just to further that, we still have issues with the way the modern treaties are. And I know in BC they just signed an accord and we didn't have a full discussion on that. And also that even though Bennett and Minister Bennett has said there's been these changes, we haven't seen any changes to the comprehensive land claims policy or the specific claims. So it's very problematic for us to support this, even though we know they're seeking changes right now. We haven't seen anything. So I know with the Union BC and Chiefs, we've always had concern and opposed the treaty processes, especially the modern ones. The historical ones have, you know, the sovereignty base, but the modern ones have, you know, all the extinguishment de facto and all the language still in them, which is problematic. So I'll be opposing this one.
I understand that, and thank you for your diplomatic language on that. I see the mover going to microphone 2. Let us take that comment, and then we'll move to the question. Microphone 2.
I'd just like to thank those who spoke on this resolution and provided their comments. Just to provide more insight to this resolution, modern treaty holders are First Nations in Canada as well. So there's like about 28 to 30 modern treaty holders in Canada. And we are in about 40% of the land mass in Canada throughout the whole North Yukon, Northwest Territories, Nunavut, parts of Ontario, BC. And we feel that because we have a unique situation, a unique relationship with the federal government, we also need the support just like every other First Nation across this Canada. And if we're not being supported to advance the implementation of our agreements by AFN, then how can we, you know, that's not a good description of AFN representing First Nations across Canada. So we're asking for the same support that all First Nations across Canada receive from AFN, working collectively, because it's challenging for us to work together to try and change policy. And as well, we say that the federal government's policy is outdated, and we, as modern day treaties, also agree that AFN's Charter of Rights, charters are also outdated in terms of only speaking for First Nations on reserve. Many of us don't have reserves, we don't live on reserves, we have settlement lands that we own, and so we would appreciate the support of the Assembly to support us. Masicho.
Thank you very much, Chief Joseph. And with that, then let us turn to the question, noting the one amendment in the first, therefore be it resolved. Is there any abstentions on amended Resolution 34? Seeing no abstentions, any opposition? Noting one here, two I saw. All right, with that, then may I say then this resolution is adopted by the consensus of the remainder. Thank you very much for that. Let us move quickly to draft Resolution 36, and by order of the program, we will deal with this. And the Resolutions Committee has recommended a bit of an omnibus, or Chief Mitchell's Halmini-bus, to pull together a few, and then we'll turn to our last speakers, a few speakers on our agenda before finishing up our resolutions. Draft late Resolution 36 is the First Nations Labor Market Agreement holders' interest in the Employment Insurance Act. And essentially what it there is, it notes, as many of us know, that there's great inequalities that exist between the rates set by the Employment Insurance Commission of Canada and the benefits provided there, and then of course the access that First Nations have, the length of employment that they have, and the unemployment rates in their community, and that disparity needs to be addressed. And so they therefore call on this resolution, and let me just make sure my movers and seconders are here. Ogima Duke Pelche from Wikwemicong unceded territory, and Chief Baron King from Moose Deer Point. I see Chief Ogima Pelche there, and Chief McLeod, you'll stand for Chief King. Thank you very much. Chief McLeod for Nipissing. Just want to make sure we've got that there. Okay, thank you very much. And then therefore be it resolved, so noting those disparities and the need to close that gap, therefore be it resolved that the Chiefs in Assembly request that the Assembly First Nations Chiefs Committee on Human Resource Development and its regional counterparts, including its technical working group and subgroups, arrange for and engage in dialogue and collaborative decision-making with Employment and Social Development Canada, ESDC, and the Employment Insurance Commission of Canada concerning unemployment benefits under Part 1 and unemployment benefits under Part 2 of the Employment Insurance Act. 2, direct the AFN to request that ESDC honor the commitments it has made about collaborative research and the collection of First Nations labor market information. 3, direct the AFN to commence dialogue with the Employment Insurance Commission of Canada regarding First Nations labor market agreement holders' input to Part 1 of the EI Act concerning employment benefits and greater flexibility in the administration of Part 2 of the EI Act concerning employment supports being administered by the First Nations labor market agreement holders. 4, request the AFN to establish a work plan and secure funds for this activity by March 31st, 2019, or as soon thereafter as possible. And 5, direct the AFN and the Chiefs Committee on Human Resource Development to provide an update at the next AFN Chiefs Assembly. Is there a need for discussion of this resolution? Seeing none and having heard the question called for, are there any abstentions for this resolution? Seeing none, are there any objections to this resolution? Seeing none, then Resolution 36 is adopted by the consensus, unanimous consensus of the group. Thank you very much. I'm just going to grab one. Yep, yeah. Omnibus the children. And just to be clear on that last one, it was Ogama Duke Belche was here, and Chief McLeod from Nipissing stepped in as the seconder. Resolutions Committee did have that. The Resolutions Committee has recommended that we put on the How Many Bus resolution the following resolutions: 37, 46, 47, 48, 51, and 57. That is the support resolutions dealing with the Yukon Salmon Treaty, support for the criminalization of forced sterilization, opposition to Bill C-71, an act to amend certain acts and regulations in relation to firearms, support for the National Indian Day Schools class action, McLean versus Canada, Indigenous home instruction for parents of preschool youngsters, and support for the Caldwell First Nations tax challenge. I'll ask you to turn to those in your late resolutions package. And with your permission, I'll seek a mover and seconder from the floor, either from amongst the movers and seconders of the original resolution or anyone from the floor who wishes to make, would help us with moving an omnibus resolution. May I have a mover? Chief Joseph, may I call on you as a mover? Thank you very much. I note that you're the mover on the Yukon Salmon Treaty, so I went there. Is there a seconder available? Chief McLeod, Nipissing First Nation, thank you very much. So with that, generally what we've tried to do by procedure is read through all the therefore be it resolves, and if it is the wish of the delegation, I will do that. However, I will ask for, we will try to see if there is unanimous consent to dispense with the reading of the therefore be it resolves on the omnibus package. Is there any objection to that? Do I have unanimous consent to dispense with the reading of the therefore be it resolves on the omnibus package? Hearing no objection, then let us then proceed to see if there's any comments or questions or the need for discussion on the resolutions contained in the omnibus package. The numbers again are 37, the Yukon Salmon Treaty; 46, support for the criminalization of forced sterilization; 47, opposition to Bill C-71; 48, support for the National Indian Day Schools class action; 51, Indigenous home instruction for parents of preschool youngsters; 57, support for the Caldwell First Nations tax challenge. With that clarification, is there a need for discussion of any of these resolutions contained within the omnibus? Seeing none and thankfully hearing question, Are there any abstentions to this omnibus package? Seeing none, is there any objection to the omnibus package? Seeing none, and very grateful and thankful to the delegation, we declare that the omnibus package is supported by consensus. Thank you.
Thank you, Harold. I'm always scared when someone says omni, but I'm over it. I'd like to bring your attention to late resolution number 44. I would also like to invite Regional Chief Kevin Hart to come speak to Jordan's Principle, and then we'll move on to the rest of the resolutions in terms of. Is 40? Did we just do 45? What we'll do then, we'll look at. I'll bring your attention to 3 resolutions: Resolution 44, 45, and 56. And I'll invite Regional Chief Kevin Hart to speak a little bit around Jordan's Principle, and we'll bring those 3 resolutions to the floor.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. I promise this will be the last time here before the Christmas break that I'm up here giving you a report, but I'm very proud as your national portfolio holder for Jordan's Principle to bring this update to the Chiefs in Assembly. You know, as you know, Jordan River Anderson was born with some very complex medical needs. He was originally from the Norway House Cree Nation, and that you know that because of some very racist policies developed by both the provincial and the federal governments, he fell through the cracks for 2 years, in which eventually, unfortunately, he passed away. But the legacy that this young man has left, you know, I just want to give an update to the Chiefs in Assembly on Jordan's Principle. You know, that we know now that Jordan's Principle is a legal principle. You know, the current work that we're doing at the AFN for Jordan's Principle firstly consists of making sure that Canada is held accountable for fully implementing Jordan's Principle, and we are doing this work alongside Dr. Cindy Blackstock. Because of this work, we have seen from July of 2016 to October 31st of this year that more than 171,000 requests were approved under Jordan's Principle. So these were new investments into our children going into the First Nations and of course some of the urban centers for First Nations children. I think this is a huge victory for our children. 171 new cases approved under Jordan's Principle to get those necessary supports behind our children. You know, because of this work, we've seen, you know, that represents the request for 171,000 programs, services, and supports that our children did not have before. So this is greatly needed in our communities and for the families. There's so much work that needs to be done. I'm very happy to come up here and give this update. However, there's still much work to be done for us to fully realize the possibilities before us to implement Jordan's Principle. You know, Canada has committed to working with First Nations to determine a long-time approach to implementing Jordan's Principle. This includes greater First Nations control over the implementation of Jordan's Principle at the community level. As I'm sure many of you already know, the current authority for Jordan's Principle ends on March 31st of 2019. However, this means there's greater opportunity before you to imagine how you want to implement Jordan's Principle for you as chiefs from your respected First Nations. That is why we're calling on Canada to invest $2.5 billion over the next 3 years so that First Nations can begin to properly fund and to provide health, social, and education programs and services to their children in their First Nations. And this is what I've heard from you as chiefs, you know, mothers, grandmothers, fathers, grandfathers, and all the caregivers and the aunts and uncles and such that we have in our communities, because we know how it is to struggle to look after, you know, our loved ones at the community level, and how much it is that we stretch every dollar to try and make everything possible for not only the leadership, but for the people that live with those struggles each and every day under Jordan's Principle. You know, we're working to get the information out to you as soon as possible so that we can discuss with your First Nation how we want to move forward with these new opportunities. However, no matter what the approach that First Nations decide they want to take with Jordan's Principle. I must make it clear that emphasizing that Jordan's Principle does not have a sunset date, and that's very crucial for us, that we make sure to tell the federal government that there's no sunset date when it comes to Jordan's Principle for now and into the foreseeable future. Lastly, we must also remember that the provinces and territories have a very big role to play in implementing Jordan's Principle. Without meaningful involvement from provincial and territorial governments, we can only go so far. So you as chiefs, I need your help to advocate to those provinces and those territories to ensure that we bring Jordan's Principle forward, but at the same time, you know, we don't have these organizations and governments and such that have the fiduciary responsibility to start doing Jordan's Principle cases just to get away from the current obligations that they have to us as First Nations. You know, in fact, this begs the question that if provincial and territorial governments are not providing essential services to First Nations children based on race, because they are sending First Nations children to access service under Jordan's Principle, would this not be grounds for another human rights complaint? And, you know, I'll look for the direction from the chiefs in the foreseeable future if we need to take Canada back to launch this human rights complaints, because that's what they're doing right now, is they're using Jordan's Principle to not fund our children, especially our First Nation children. You know, getting this relationship right is imperative, and provincial and territorial governments must work with First Nations as full partners to implement Jordan's Principle. You know, our children are worth the investment, and as political leaders for our communities, we must work together to continue to remind all levels of government of this. So I'm looking for you, chiefs, as my allies, to help me along the way by sending letters and emails, you know, to your government officials, both at the provincial level, the territorial level, but also at the federal level, to continue this investment going forward on Jordan's Principle. So, you know, with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to the important work in front of us. And for everybody out there, with the holiday season and that coming up, that I want to wish you and your families and your nations and your home fires well in the upcoming weeks. But one thing I want you to do is let's not forget our brothers and sisters out there that are homeless right now. It's getting cold out there. You know, there's hungry people out there, and we need to take care of those ones too as well. So, you know, my wishes are to you. I sent out an email this afternoon to the National Chief and the Executive to distribute to you as the First Nations, as I was just advised of the final arrangements of Elder Cushane. You know, so with that, I'll be traveling home to Saugeen First Nation tomorrow to be with the family, and of course, you know, to go and pay my respects to my dear elder and great friend Elmer. So, you know, with that, a lot of you chiefs and everybody in this room reached out to me, came, shook my hand, and gave well wishes to the family. I'm going to make sure to relay those messages to the family in Saugeen and as well as in Pick River. And I had the opportunity to speak with the chief from Pick River this morning, and we talked about the arrangements and such, as well as the celebration, because what we're doing right now is we're celebrating his life and legacy that he left behind for all of us. So thank you. Hegosani Miigwech.
I was happy to hear Regional Chief is heading home. I can probably hitch a ride. Just so everyone knows, we have put a blanket in the back behind the cameras to support Grassy Narrows and the travel for their youth. So I'm not sure we'll have time for a song, but definitely the blanket has been put behind the cameras. The Resolutions Committee has suggested that another omni resolution be brought to the floor for consideration by the Assembly. Those resolutions are late resolution number 44, financial compensation for victims of discrimination in the child welfare system, late draft resolution number 45, realizing a National First Nations Youth Build Canada program, and late draft resolution number 56, support communities to access proper nutrition. I'll look for a mover and a seconder for this omni resolution. Microphone number 1.
Vice Chief Pratt, proxy for Chief Peter Beattie of Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation. I'll move it.
Thank you, Deputy Chief. I need a mover for this omni resolution. Seconder in the middle, or microphone number 2.
Chief Maingan Henry, Chippewas of the Thames.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief. I'll open the floor for discussion on these 3 resolutions. Microphone number 2.
Yeah, Chair, I just have a maybe amendment to number 44. You know, they're going on the human rights ruling, but I think you should make reference to the Alberta child welfare case that happened a few years ago where the children in care won the case. And I think you should make reference on either therefore number 6 or somewhere in there so that you could use that for reference to help this case.
Thank you, Chief. Is there any objection from my mover and seconder by adding another therefore be resolved specific to the Alberta child welfare case? Good. Seconder? I'm looking at my seconder. He's reading it. He had to think about it for a little while. Any other conversation on resolutions 44, 45, and 56? Seeing none, any abstentions to those resolutions? Anyone against the Omni resolution? Seeing none, we accept resolutions 44, 45, and 56 by consensus. Thank you. I'd like to move to 2 agenda items in your agenda, which are 1, the Moose Hide campaign, and 2nd, Indigenomics. I'd like to invite Paul Lacerte, who's the Chief Executive Officer and Founder, and also Caroline Hinton, who will speak a little bit of Indigenomics. So please help me welcome Mr. Paul Lacerte. Oh, and don't reminder to go back and get those donations to the Youth for Grassy Narrows. Please help me welcome Paul Lacerte.
Hari Deneza Sekeza Daicho Paul Sadney Mark Lacerte Spa Marilyn Slew Nasaldea Khatsen Sophie Ketlo Alu Sagana Laxiliu in Jan Yankaktane Keo Tebesna Chalia Injan Algonquin Keo. My name is Paul. My mom and dad is Mark and Marilyn. I'm a carrier from Notley, and I'm a Caribou clan member. I'm a first-generation residential school survivor. My dad went to the Lejac residential school, and my late first wife, Loretta Madam, also went to Lejac. That school closed in 1984, and I am an adult survivor of early childhood abuse myself. I wanted to say how honored I am to be here and to have opportunity to speak with you today about the Moose Hide campaign. It's the National Day of Remembrance and Action on Violence Against Women today as well. Thank you for your support for the resolution number 24 today, support for the Moose Hide campaign, and a special thank you to Chief Harvey McLeod and Chief Lee Spahan, the mover and seconder, and thank you to the chiefs that are here from British Columbia, from the First Nations Summit, UBCSC, and AFN, all of which have recently passed resolutions of support for the work that we're doing. I just wanted to share briefly why we started this, what happened. We were hunting along the Highway of Tears, my daughter Raven and I, in 2011. Highway of Tears being in northern BC, cuts right through our carrier territory. And we shot a moose that morning. My daughter Raven, Detsancho in our language, was gutting out that moose. And we've been talking about the Highway of Tears because when we're hunting, we're also looking for human remains. We got some training, so we're looking for clothes and the remains of our loved ones. And so, I'm watching her, and she's 16. she's cleaning out that moose, and I got a chance to witness her as a young warrior. And, but I was also so terrified because of the propensity of this country to harm her just because she's an Indigenous woman. And so we got this idea, so we took that moose hide back to Victoria, we tanned it up in our backyard. I got a smell complaint from our neighbors, it's stinky business. And so they actually sent the bylaw officer with an odor citation to like tell us to tone it down. So I went up and got my copy of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and gave that to him, and he left. Yeah, so what happened was we tanned up that hide, and my girls cut it up. I have 4 daughters, that's who I'm here for. And all of the sisters here and in our communities, they cut up the first 25,000 squares of moose hide, and they hand wrote on these cards, little white index cards. It says, if you wear this, and I see so many people here wearing it, thank you very much for doing that. But here's what it means is if you wear it, you promise not to ever do harm to the women and children in your life, in your community. And it also means that you promise to stand up and speak out against violence towards the women and children in our communities. It's not right, it's not normal, it's not love. And there is an opportunity for us, I think, in today's world to really spread that as a new narrative of what, you know, reconciliation and decolonization looks like in our communities, and for us to lead Canadians in the Me Too world, you know, and for us as men to be able to reach for our higher selves, to be able to continue our healing journey. You know, some of us, including me, as I said, you know, we got hurt when we were little, and so there's a lot of healing that still has to happen in our communities, and this is also an opportunity to support that. So my daughters cut up 25,000 squares, and they hand wrote these little cards, but they got repetitive stress injury from like cutting up all that moose hide, and we didn't have WCB in our house, so we decided to turn it into an organization. And since 2011 till today, you know, we've distributed over 1.2 million squares of moose hide to 800 communities. Thank you. So there are 800 communities, Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities across Canada that are activated. Over 2,000 projects have taken place to work to end violence against women and children. We're now partnered with the RCMP, and a special thank you to the Assembly of Manitoba Chiefs for your invitation to come and meet with you in Winnipeg, and to support the work there, both with the First Nations in Manitoba and with the RCMP. We're just launching K-12 lesson plans, Moose Hide Campaign lesson plans, and that was developed in the Edmonton School District by the Indigenous Teachers Council there. And so, you know, the opportunity to be here to share a few words with you about the work that we're trying to do and where it came from, and the fact that it's medicine from the land, and what's so important to us is that it's medicine from the Highway of Tears. It comes from the sacrifice that moose, Jeo in our language, made that morning, and the transmission of traditional knowledge between my daughter and I. She now has a little baby girl, Cedar Suss, we call her Cedar Bear, and we were just back up to where we shot that first moose this past summer, hunting again, and got blessed again with another moose this year. And to see my granddaughter there just makes me even more fiercely committed to keep spreading this message and just keeping our precious ones safe in our communities, and keep reaching for our higher selves as men, talking to our young guys about love and respect and safety, and our code of conduct for what it is to be a healthy warrior in our communities. And that's not to suggest that any of us is perfect. It's just to suggest that this is an invitation. It's a conversation starter. So people, if you're wearing it here today, please wear it again after you leave here, and people will see that it's a thing. They see it's a thing, right? If they don't know what it is, and then they'll ask you like, "Oh, hey, I see you're wearing a thing. What is that?" And then I say, "It's moose hide." I wasn't going to do that, sorry. But it's good because it's a conversation starter, hey? And then it's like, it's Peace Amuside, I'm wearing it, so you'll ask me that so we can have a conversation, so I can tell you that violence against women and children is not right, and it's not normal, and it's not acceptable in our communities, and it's contrary to the fundamental values that have been passed on to us by our elders and generations before us, and it has to stop. And we are working together, and we're part of a movement that's taking action as men and boys and women and girls to make that change. So thank you very, very much for the chance to share a few words, and I wish you all the best with the rest of your proceedings.
Chief Alexis, microphone 2.
Aboshtet. Thank you very much for your presentation, as well as I want to acknowledge the lands that we're on right now, of the Algonquin people. National Chief, the executive, we hold you up today. And I ask everybody here, the chiefs and the elders and the knowledge keepers, to keep my community in your prayers. Today we received information or an update, you know, when you travel, something happens in your community and you just don't want to hear things like that. And there was a man broke into one of my members' homes and killed 2 of her babies. One was 7 months and 3 years, and beat her. And she's in ICU right now. So we ask everybody to say prayers for our people back home.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chief. Let us take a moment for that. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Let us once again give thanks to this young boy who's also a grandfather for his presentation. Thank you very much, Paul. We are turning to our next presentation on Indigenomics, and I don't want to give away any of the great news, but Caroline Hilton, well known to us, has served on the Prime Minister's Economic Development Advisory Committee, amongst many other honors, of course. So please help me welcome Caroline Hilton.
Uklasish Caroline Hilton, Heshquak Subsish Uklas, Wakatushko Atsa MT. My new channel's name is Wakatush, which means I come from a line of the oldest woman. Thank you very much for having time on your agenda here. In beginning, I would like to acknowledge the original place name of here, the original peoples of here, the original language of here, and the teachings of here, because this is the vibrational energy of here, and it's the consistency of reality of what we bring as an Indigenous worldview, of our relevance and our importance to today. This is a concept of Indigenomics. Some of you may have not heard of the word Indigenomics. You're in the right place. Some of you may have heard the word Indigenomics. You're on time. The concept of Indigenomics has been in development over the last 5 years. Some of you may be wondering what the concept of Indigenomics is. Economics from an Indigenous worldview. It's the reclaiming of Indigenous economic space today. It's the bringing of visibility to the growth of Indigenous business success within this country. Indigenomics is modern Indigenous economic design. It's pushing the agenda of our ability to participate within our territories, to be able to develop our jurisdiction, to be able to develop our authorities, and that the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, the space to facilitate what does that mean we have a right to an economy as Indigenous people. The intention, building the collective modern economic response. The response to the fact that we are still here as Indigenous people, that our resilience has allowed this new economic playing field within this country. The intention of the Indigenomics Institute to converge the ideas, resources, tools, and people to grow the Indigenous economy today. The intention of Indigenomics is to name the conditions of Indigenous economic regression, which includes the historical and current underdevelopment of the Indian reservation. To be able to name the conditions of economic regression is the essential point that the counter to that is we are a powerful people. The Indigenomics Institute is driving solutions for Indigenous economic growth today. The Unleashing Partners. The First Nations Major Projects Coalition is a truly revolutionary force. It's taking something that's very real, which is the right of Aboriginal people to have a say on resource development and project development within our territories, and builds that into a region-wide, province-wide, and eventually nation-wide source of authority and opportunity. This concept of Indigenomics is essentially the establishment of economic models that support the growth and development of our inclusion in our economies. The National Aboriginal Capital Corporation is a key partner in the Indigenomics Institute who are delivering significant impact through the existing network of entrepreneurs within this country. With 58 Indigenous financial institutions across this country that have made over 45,000 loans totaling $2.5 billion. Studies are demonstrating that each dollar that these Aboriginal financial institutions are lending feed into 360 into the GDP. So this really is feeding this new environment that's saying, with proper focused attention around specific Aboriginal investment, this builds the capital base and also begins to demonstrate why the Indigenous economy is key to the future economic prosperity, not only for ourselves, but for Canada as a whole. The Canadian Council for Aboriginal Business, leading the supply chain initiative that's supporting the push for a $100 billion Indigenous economy through a supply chain initiative, actively engaging government in the procurement process to be able to increase up to 5% via the Aboriginal procurement marketplace, who's creating the condition and the playing field to ensure that if this 5% was able to be supported, the influx would be a potential $11 billion to the Indigenous economy. These are the numbers that need to begin to be demonstrated of why the growth and the potential of the Indigenous economy is essential. The National Aboriginal Trust Officers Association, who's, as an organization, are committed to providing Indigenous peoples of Canada with the resources and information to efficiently create, manage, and operate the trusts, the wealth of our nations, as a means to ensure the 7 generations yet unborn can benefit from the goals and dreams of the present generation. The ability to see this as the long-term pathway for self-sustaining and vital economic opportunities for our communities. The concept of Indigenomics is restoring the narrative of Indigenous peoples are a fiscal burden in this country towards a new narrative that we are an economic powerhouse. We are a powerful people. It is in this restoring that we begin to see the patterns that are emerging today. Canada has always been in a legal relationship with our nations, but there's been lack of participation both within the legal and the economic relationship. Indigenomics is focusing on the evolution of the legal relationship into economic growth and the ability to support nations in the work and the economic development of our territories. Building from the 2016 TD Economic Report that identified specifically that the size of the 2016 Indigenous economy attained well over the estimate of which had been originally $30 billion. So with the $32 billion Indigenous economy is the last measurement done in 2016, we begin to see that this annual economy is both growing and sets the conditions for required focused attention for what growth can look like from a design perspective. The Indigenomics Institute focuses on the concept that questions are the architecture of tomorrow. The quality of the questions that we ask today support the development of the future, the 7 generations that we're looking to be able to support. The inception. The core question of the Indigenomics Institute: How can we collectively facilitate the growth of the Indigenous economy from $32 billion of its current value in 2016 to $100 billion in 5 years? This exists in the field of possibility to actualize $68 billion in economic transactions to support this growth of the Indigenous economy over 5 years. The ability to facilitate this economic transaction is really, again, that consistent reflection that we are powerful people. The teachings from my home is that the words that we say are prayers. The words that we say, every word lands as a prayer. Every time we say $100 billion Indigenous economy, it reawakens the Indian and the child that John A. Macdonald tried to kill. This is our time. This is the power moment. Who wants to play Indigenomics? This is the time. This is the power moment. Let's have the courage to do this together. Thank you.
Okay, just as we're preparing to transition back to the resolutions, I'll ask David to make his way back to the stage. Are there any questions or comments for Carol Ann and the Indigenomics movement? Thank you very much. David? It looks like I think the recommendation will be to bundle the health resolutions. So that's 38, 42, where are we? Show me where I am. 38, 42, 50, 56, and 59. Let me grab those. We did it?
One note on 59.
Microphone 2.
Hey, Dance, Oniganil Christian Sinclair, Opaskwayak Cree Nation. Just for the presentation that was just given by the young lady there. Are you looking for support for that, or how do you get First Nations involved with what you're doing? Because it sounds very interesting. And I know that when we presented a resolution here from Opaskwayak on the Natural Resource Transfer Act, I've always said that that's where our true wealth and power lies as First Nations in Canada, because that's the economic driver that'll achieve what you're setting out to do, and for us to truly achieve the quality of life that we are seeking. So how do we become part of what you're proposing, or what are you looking for?
Absolutely, thank you. And really that is the open invitation of who wants to play Indigenomics. And the concept itself has moved from a single hashtag into managing a movement. It's a collective movement that $100 billion is possible. I left my contact information there. I wasn't necessarily looking for support from the floor, but really to insert both the concept of Indigenomics as well as the potential of the $100 billion Indigenous economy. And it's the work that's already being done, and to be able to look at it from a focused design perspective. Thank you.
Thank you.
Microphone 2.
Chief Ray Morris, Need Hyben. Thank you for your presentation for the generations to come. But the concern of the day is in the read of Bill C-69, that would kill Indigenomics. So in that case, can't support Bill C-69 to uphold your efforts. Thank you.
All right, once again, let's thank Carol Ann for that presentation. Thank you very much. All right, we did clarify that in the last set of omnibus resolutions, number 56 was passed, so we will look to all the ones that are health related. So I'll ask you to turn to draft resolution 38, support for the development of holistic First Nations wellness facilities. Draft 42, response to the ongoing opioid and methamphetamine crisis. Draft 50, First Nations cannabis jurisdiction, and Draft 59, action for experimentation survivors. All right, so then given that, may I have a mover for this omnibus package? Chief Ignace Gull is the mover. May I have a seconder? And I see Chief Harvey McLeod. Give me a minute here. As a seconder. And so just noting that, and again, once again, I'll ask for the two things. One is there's one clarification on 59 I need to make. Okay. Yeah, so we're just going to note that we misspelled Chief Ferry's last name on 59. But again, given the official record, it becomes a part of the omnibus package, and so mover and seconder Gull and McLeod. Yeah. Okay, and then I do see our mover is at the microphone 1, and he had indicated he wanted to read in a change on 59, but let us turn to microphone 1.
Chair, I just wanted to point out that we need to do some work on this resolution, and I have my First Nation rep here from Atawapska to talk about the resolution, why she wanted the draft resolutions. The first one, there's a second one, so she's kind of explained that.
Waje, kagashe hawa den dagus nishin hason, maskwana dotem, ene no io esconina, dobskatohugomagashe si bichin doschin. My spirit name is the one who behaves elderly. I'm from the Bear Clan. I'm Inino Cree from Attawapiskat First Nation, and Eo Cree from Jasasi B Cree First Nation. I'm also known as Jocelyn Wabano Ayatel. I'm an Indian Day School experimentation survivor. And these experimentations that I'm speaking of are vaccine, fluoride, mercury, what has been called horse biscuits, for lack of a better term. My mother was subjected to these horse biscuits in the Indian residential school, and they reappeared when we were in the Indian Day School. And there has been a lot of fallout with health concerns, including the overrepresentation of cancer. I've lost classmates, Linda Spence, Elizabeth Sutherland, Darlene Luded, just to name a few. So there's children and families left behind that we need to consider in speaking about this. There are numerous diseases: chronic fatigue, lupus, fibromyalgia, arthritis, chronic pain. We never consented for Canada to treat us as guinea pigs. Canada failed to recognize us as human beings. And we're talking about intergenerational experiments that were done in the Indian residential school, the Indian Day School, and this millennium scoop with the pharmaceutical experimentations by the pharmaceutical industry. And the result has been life-changing. These health challenges are ongoing. And essentially what I'm speaking to is murder. This is murder. This is holistic genocide. This is a crime against humanity. This is war crimes and a crime of aggression. And so we're requesting that our treaty rights, when my Jabans, signed that treaty signatory for treaty number 9 with the medical chest clause, the unforeseeable circumstances of our health that be included in that medical chest clause. And so we need health coverage, we need disability coverage, we need our meds, our transportation, our counseling, and the alternative methods to our care. We need access to our First Nations trust accounts. We want an inquest, a fact-finding mission on what has happened to us. What's involved in our disabilities? What were the ingredients in those vaccinations and those fluorides? We want our records to be given to us because these are our sacred stories. It's part of our authentic sacred nationhood medicine bundle. And this affects our Indian Day School class action. If you consider Omar Kadar got $10.5 million for his case. Consider all the lives lost and the debilitation that we are presently enduring. So I want to speak to 2 amendments. Number 3, therefore be it resolved that the chiefs in assembly, and if we go to number 3, call on the Government of Canada to initiate a First Nations survivor-led inquest to uncover the truth of these experiments in order to better inform the medical community on how to treat the resulting illnesses, to inform the Canadian public of the truth of what occurred, and to give some measure of peace to the survivors. That's the First Amendment.
To Resolution 59.
Resolution 59. And number 4, a change. Call on the Government of Canada, the Canadian Medical Association, and medical practitioners for the repatriation of related historical and associated records, as well as the retention of these records by Indigenous peoples. So right now...
Jocelyn, let me just set my microphone, please. Let me just be clear then. So on 59, we have the short amendment. On 3, and on 4, you're replacing the language there with the new language that you proposed?
Yes.
Great, and I'm just going to make sure we get that language from you. And so I just want Ignace, as the mover, clearly that is fine with you. And our seconder was Chief McLeod. And I see that if you could pause your conference call briefly, Chief McLeod, and give me a thumbs up. Good, thank you very much. Good, those amendments are included.
Okay, good.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Is there a need for further discussion on the omnibus package? Question being called. Is there any abstentions to the omnibus package on 38, 42, 50, and 59, noting the amendments on 59? Seeing no abstentions, are there any objections? Seeing none, then with your permission, this omnibus package is adopted by consensus. Thank you very much. Matthew?
Thank you, Harold. I'd like to draw your attention to late resolution number 40. I do apologize to my Francophone delegates. I have this one only in English. The title is Social Innovation, Social Finance. I might have lost it in my heap of papers. Social Innovation and Social Finance Framework, Leaving No One Behind. I'll read into the record. Well, actually, I'll see if I have my movers and seconders. Moved by Chief Byron Louis. Microphone number 2.
Bonnie Leonard, I'm proxy for Chief Barb Cote, Shuswap Ban. Chief Byron Lewis had to leave the assembly, and he asked me to move this resolution on his behalf.
Thank you. J'ai un copropositeur, Chief Scott McLeod. We have Chief McLeod as a seconder. Je l'ai trouvé en français. Je vais le lire. Pour ce motif, les chefs en Assemblée, enjoignant à l'Assemblée des Premières Nations de déterminer et de chercher les ressources visant à financer un cadre ou un document d'orientation stratégique sur l'innovation sociale et le financement social afin d'aider et cerner les lacunes et les priorités financières des Premières Nations pour informer Emploi et Développement social Canada et orienter les prochaines étapes. 2. Demande au gouvernement fédéral de travailler avec l'APN pour déterminer les investissements et tirer des ressources particulières du Fonds de financement social et du Fonds Innovation stratégique qui assureront les avantages durables à long terme pour les initiatives des Premières Nations en matière d'innovation sociale et de financement social. 3. Exhortant IEDSC à s'aligner sur les mesures prises par les Premières Nations et le Centre pour la gouvernance de l'information des Premières Nations pour respecter les objectifs du programme à l'horizon 2030, en collaboration avec transparence sur les données disponibles en vue du mieux appuyer à mettre en œuvre les ODD et d'en mesurer les progrès et à élaborer un plan de travail stratégique pour les personnes handicapées dans le cadre du programme à l'horizon 2030 au sein de tous les ministères fédéraux, par exemple. I open the floor for conversation. Microphone number 2.
There's a slight amendment to be made to this resolution. Item number 2, delete the 3 words, Strategic Innovation Fund.
We're keeping Social Finance Fund, and we're losing Strategic Innovation Fund. Mover, seconder, good. Any other conversation on resolution number 40? Seeing none. Any abstentions to resolution 40? Any against resolution 40? Seeing none, I declare resolution 40 passed by consensus by the Assembly. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'll ask you to turn to late draft resolution 49, Federal Government Procurement Programs for First Nations, moved by Keith Matthew, proxy, Chief Alvin Poche, St. Mary's. Are either proxy Matthew or Chief Poche available in the Assembly? I see Chief Poche here to my left. Not seeing Chief Matthew. May I have proxy Matthew? May I have someone stand for that? I see Chief Spahan, Lee Spahan, there in the back of the room. Thank you very much. Coldwater First Nation. Federal procurement programs for First Nations. I think our Indigenomics presentation pretty much provided all the whereases we would need for this discussion, and they are reflected in the notes that you see there. Therefore, be it resolved that the chiefs and assemblies support and advocate for stronger and targeted procurement strategies that result in federal government contracts to First Nations across Canada. 2, direct the Assembly of First Nations to call upon the federal government, specifically Crown Indigenous Relations Canada, Indigenous Services Canada, Innovation, Science and Economic Development, Public Services and Procurement Canada, and all appropriate government departments and associated organizations to prioritize First Nations involvement and access to federal government procurement programs and projects. And 3, direct the AFN Chiefs Committee on Economic Development to lead and work with Public Services Procurement Canada and all appropriate federal government departments in the development of a First Nations federal government procurement programming and initiatives. We open the floor for conversation and turn to microphone 2.
Hey, Dancy, Oniganinu, Christian Sinclair, Opaskwayak Cree Nation. Just in regards to the Senator, therefore be it resolves, I just wanted to put an addition to it because I was talking to some colleagues from Ontario. And there is already the procurement strategy in place, but the problem that happens is a lot of the bureaucracy does not work with the First Nations. What I would like to add in there is that there's actually an implementation officer that is created in partnership with the Assembly of First Nations to ensure that these procurements that do exist already and are failing miserably are implemented and that the federal government is held accountable so that actual results, statistics, and benchmarks are created so that we can see the actual flow of these procurements flowing back to the First Nation entities that pursue them.
Thank you, Chief Sinclair. Is there a specific phrase you'd like to add?
You can summarize that.
David? At this late hour, I'll look at David.
Yeah, it was very, very simply creating an implementation officer.
So it's to create an implementation officer.
From within the Assembly of First Nations
Okay.
under your economic development program, and that it track and create benchmarks to ensure that there is results and progress being made on this particular initiative.
Yeah, and I think maybe the simple is just at the end of 2 is just to add, in addition to that call for, and to create an implementation officer.
Yeah,
to
because that's
ensure
the key to making
accountability.
this work, because the way it is right now, it does exist, but it's just failing without that accountability and transparency.
Okay.
Very good,
Thank
sir.
you very
Thank
much. I'll look to our mover and seconder to just make sure that that is okay. Yep. And do we have the okay of the mover and seconder? Yes, yes, and yes. Thank you very much. At this late hour, it took me a moment to remember where the mover and seconder were. All right, is there a need for further discussion on 49 as amended? Seeing none, are there any abstentions on 49 as amended? Seeing none, are there any objections on 49 as amended? And then thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. 49 is adopted by consensus, and we now turn to the final 5.
Yeah. Final 5 doesn't sound too final. However, résolution de dernière minute numéro 52, titre rejet de l'approche du Canada en matière de législation sur les ajouts aux réserves. Proposeur, chef Nelson Genaille. Chief Genaille. Proposeur. Microphone number 1.
Hello, Chief Karen Batson, Pine Creek First Nation. I'll be moving this on behalf of Chief Janai.
Thank you very much. Co-proposeur, Chef Karen Baston.
Batson, B-A-T-S-O-N.
Batson.
Are you seconding?
Seconder, proxy, Ranald Cook, Saptoya Cree Nation.
Thank you, Chief. You got those movers and seconders. So Chief Batson is moving. Je vais lire les résolutions. Je vais lire pour ce motif, les chefs en assemblée. 1. Affirme de nouveau le soutien de la résolution 26-2012 de l'Assemblée des Premières Nations, réforme du processus et de la politique ajout aux réserves qui demande A. Un processus révisé d'ajout aux réserves qui ferait en sorte que la mise en œuvre de tous les ententes de règlements comportant des engagements de l'AAR et préséance sur d'autres intérêts, exemple, perte de taxes municipaux, etc., qui préserverait l'honneur de la couronne et respecterait le statut constitutionnel des droits ancestraux et issus de traités des Premières Nations. B. L'examen conjoint d'une loi conforme à la norme du consentement préalable donné librement et connaissance de cause qui entendrait les modèles législatifs s'appliquent actuellement aux Premières Nations en Saskatchewan, en Alberta et au Manitoba, aux Premières Nations d'autres provinces et territoires et comporterait d'autres mesures législatives qui soutiennent par la politique de l'AR révisée rendrait le processus plus efficace et plus transparent. 2. Demande à l'APN d'entreprendre immédiatement une analyse approfondie de la loi numéro 2 d'exécution du budget 2018 en se penchant spécifiquement sur la loi sur l'ajout de terres à des réserves et la création de réserves afin de déterminer comment cette loi pourrait affecter les droits inhérents des Premières Nations. 3. Demande à l'APN de chercher immédiatement des occasions d'intervenir et d'apporter des commentaires sur la loi et lorsque cela est possible, de souligner les préoccupations des Premières Nations au sujet de processus utilisés pour élaborer et déposer la loi. 4. Demande au Canada d'absentir de caractériser l'élaboration de la loi comme un travail de consultation ou de collaboration avec les Premières Nations ou l'APN et de commencer immédiatement à préparer une explication détaillée de son intervention législative et à présenter au comité des chefs de l'APN sur les terres, les territoires et les ressources en vue de discussions complémentaires. I'll open the floor for conversation on resolution number 52, microphone number 2.
Thank you, Russell Dibo, proxy for Conostagawe Grand Chief Serge Simon. I'd like to propose a friendly amendment to add a number 5. The wording I would suggest is to call on Canada to ensure that any future additions to reserve legislation shall be subject to joint oversight implementation with First Nations. Because, you know, they tried to slip that one by us in that omnibus legislation that you don't like to say. They buried it in there. And I would just point out, the Speaker criticized, the Speaker of the House criticized them for trying to throw so much into that omnibus bill. And when they did split it, they still kept this part in the omnibus. So I just want to point out that the Liberal government was criticized for doing that. And they also promised that they would never do that because Harper did it, right? So I think that's why I'm suggesting that additional...
Could you repeat that wording for us, please?
I can try.
We got it in the back?
Oh, did they get it?
We got it in the back.
Okay.
We didn't get it up here, but they got it in the back. Thank you.
Okay,
sir.
thank you.
I'll look to our mover and seconder on accepting. Mover's okay. Seconder. Where'd my seconder go? Oh, there he goes. Thank you very much. We have approval for the amendment in addition to number 5, our whereas clause or therefore be resolved clause number 5. Any further discussion on resolution number 52? Seeing none, any abstentions to 52? Any opposed to resolution 52? Seeing none, resolution 52 has been passed by consensus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll ask you to turn to late draft resolution 54, inherent in treaty-based funding agreements, moved by Chief Ira McCarthy and seconded by Chief Evan Tapetat. Is Chief Tapetat and Chief McCarthy available in the assembly? And if not, do I have a mover and a seconder from the floor? Chief Sinclair is a mover from OCN, Pasco Cree Nation. Seconder? Ah, yes, the same seconder. Your name again? Do you remember the seconder's name? Do we remember the seconder's name? I hate to make you make the long walk back to microphone 2 or microphone 1. And it is Wendell Cook. Oh, he's there now. Welcome, Wendell Cook, to microphone 1.
Reynold Cook. Sapatoya Cree Nation, Manitoba. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Now that's clear to all of us. Provides a good sound basis for especially their experience in Saskatchewan with federal funding being sent to the province without proper accommodation and significant funding without proper accommodation for First Nations, and so therefore calls on the chiefs, therefore be it resolved that the chiefs in assembly, looking at the national perspective, so that, and then there's national implications to the therefore be it resolved, that the chiefs in assembly direct the Assembly of First Nations to call upon provincial and federal governments to uphold the honor of the Crown and their treaty obligations by consulting with First Nations before allocating any federal transfer payments to the province for any reason, and 2, direct the AFN to advocate for First Nations to have direct access to funding in a way consistent with First Nations treaty and inherent rights. Is there a need for discussion of this resolution? Seeing none and having heard the question, are there any abstentions? Seeing none, are there any objections? Then with your permission, late draft resolution 54 is adopted by consensus. Thank you.
J'aimerais emporter votre attention à résolution de dernière minute numéro 55, soutien à l'appel de l'action numéro 79 de la CVR, proposeur, chef George Coate. Chief Coate here. Do we have someone else proposing or moving resolution number 55? Microphone number 2.
Proxy for Keyscoos First Nation, move for George Cody.
Thank you.
Place. Thank you.
Co-proposeur, chef Leo Matarawaben. Thank you, Chief. J'aimerais lire ce qui pour les motifs des chefs en assemblée, enjoignant à l'Assemblée des Premières Nations d'appuyer l'appel à l'action numéro 79 un plan national du patrimoine et une stratégie pour la commémoration, excusez-moi, de tous les sites de pensionnats indiens. En joignant à l'APN d'appuyer le Centre national pour la vérité et la réconciliation en présentant à la Commission de lieux en monument historique national un mémoire axé sur les survivants et les communautés qui demandent au Canada de désigner officiellement tous les sites des pensionnats comme lieux historiques nationaux. En joignant à l'APN d'appuyer la présentation d'un mémoire de la CLMN par le CNVR en se formant sur les principes suivants. A. Que les collectivités ayant le contrôle de tous les monuments érigés sur les sites de pensionnats indiens. B. Que les communautés ayant toute latitude pour déterminer la portée, la forme et le contenu de tout monument, y compris la possibilité de refuser un monument. C. Que les communautés soient habilitées de produire des récits sur leur propre expérience des pensionnats conformément à l'appel de l'action numéro 78 de la CVR. D. Il y a un besoin continu d'honorer et de reconnaître les enfants qui ne sont jamais rentrés des pensionnats. E. Il subsiste des certaines de lieux de sépultures non identifiés associés au site des pensionnats indiens. 4. En joignant à l'APN de demander à la Commission des lieux et des monuments historiques nationaux de reconnaître les sites de pensionnats indiens comme lieux historiques nationaux. 5. En joignant à l'APN de demander au gouvernement du Canada d'encourager le CNVR à élaborer une réponse complète à un plan pour répondre aux appels à l'action numéro 72 à 76 et la production des récits communautaires visés par l'appel à l'action numéro 78. I'll open the floor for conversation on résolution numéro 55. Seeing none, I'll go to question. Any opposition to resolution number 55? Any abstentions to resolution number 55? Seeing none, resolution 55 is adopted by consensus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, please turn to late draft resolution 58. Support for compensation for past flooding and meaningful consultation and accommodation of affected First Nations on Manitoba's proposed Lake Manitoba and Lake St. Martin outlet channels project, moved by Chief Cornell McLean, seconded by Chief Hector Shorting. Chief McLean or Chief Shorting, are you available in the Assembly? If not, may I have a mover and seconder for this late draft resolution? Chief Sinclair, thank you very much. And Chief Burns, thank you. Chief, I did it again. Chief George from Burns Lake. This is the second meeting in as many provinces where I've made that very mistake. All right, thank you for being a good sport, Chief. So, Chief Sinclair and Chief George. I'm going to pause every time now just to... So what this resolution notes that in many cases the flooding that our Manitoba First Nations brothers have experienced is not a result of natural flooding, but as a result of government-approved diversions, and in particular these communities were affected in 2011 when more than 2,000 of their members were evacuated, and they have not been compensated since that time, and there are concerns that in this newly approved development that they continue to bear the brunt of the impacts, and so therefore be it resolved that the chiefs in Assembly call upon the Government of Canada and Government of Manitoba to negotiate a fair settlement of all outstanding First Nations compensation claims arising from the 2011 flood and other past floods. 2, call on the Assembly of First Nations to support First Nations in Manitoba in the assertion of their rights to be directly involved as true partners with the governments of Manitoba and Canada in designing and implementing a long-term solution to flooding in the region. 3, direct the AFN to advocate for the development of a true partnership between affected First Nations and the Government of Manitoba and the Government of Canada in designing and implementing a long-term solution to flooding in the region. And 4, call upon the governments of Canada and Manitoba to work with First Nations to develop a consultation and accommodation process on the Channels project consistent with obtaining First Nations free, prior, and informed consent. Let us turn to microphone 2. Chief George.
Chief Burns. No. Just going to give
Chief
Kevin
Burns
Hart.
to you.
Just going to give Kevin Hart permission to speak.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say to the Chiefs in Assembly here that I would like you to support this resolution. As you know, since 2011, that the provincial government deliberately flooded out over 5,000 of our members in the Manitoba region. And to this day, we've had elders that have passed away. We've lost youth, you know, to all the social detriments in the city of Winnipeg and such, including our young women and girls and such. So, you know, this is something that I was tasked and given recently a new portfolio in emergency measures from National Chief, and I'd like to thank him for that. To do this work moving forward, you know, as we know, we see with climate change and that there's a lot of floods that are occurring. Well, for us in Manitoba, we had a 1 in 500 year flood. We had a 1 in 1,000 year flood. We had a 1 in 300 year flood. You know what I mean? Like every year, the province and the feds are giving us an excuse that, you know, these flood occurrences that are happening and being deliberately done by governments that have the control structures in place. What they did in 2011, that instead of the city of Winnipeg being flooded, they flooded out our people in the Interlake area. Now, if we use that same model of what happened in Alberta when the city of Calgary was flooded, you know, they spent billions of dollars to get the city of Calgary ready for that Calgary Stampede that summer, to have that big celebration that time. You know, why can't they put that investment behind getting these citizens home in my region? So I hope that everybody will vote in this unanimously to help support the membership that we have in the Manitoba region. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much, Regional Chief. And I want to thank you for respecting and abiding by the rules set by the chiefs about non-chiefs and proxies approaching the microphone, and I really appreciate that excellent modeling. And so let us turn to the question on this one. Are there any abstentions to draft resolution 58? Are there any? We're in the middle of it. Are there any objections to resolution 58? Then, with your permission, and as requested by the regional chief, late draft resolution 58 for the support for compensation for past flooding and meaningful consultation and accommodation is adopted by consensus unanimously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harold. Before we move to our last resolution for consideration by the Assembly, I do want to remind everyone of the blanket in the back. Il y a une couverte en arrière pour les jeunes de Grassy Narrow pour leur voyagement ici à Ottawa pour supporter leur cause dans leur communauté. Also, as you've noticed that we've had so many resolutions and so many draft resolutions, so many changes, and now the resolutions are coming to us in small paper, about this size, so that we can read it quite large. À votre attention, résolution numéro 60, consultation de Santé Canada sur les lignes directrices concernant le 1.4 dioxane. Proposeur, Chef R. Donald Miracle. I see him in the room. Proposeur, Chef Chris Plain. Je cherche microphone number 1.
I didn't see Chris Plain here today, but so it'll be seconded. I've asked Chief Greg Nadjuan from Chippewas of Nawash, and he's agreed to second it. He's seated behind me.
Thank you, Chief. Je vais aller dans le record pour ce motif. Pour ce motif, I take no consideration of what's coming from me from my co-chair. Oh, yeah, he's not allowed to make any recommendations or calls. Microphone number 1.
I apologize to the Assembly. Somehow there was some miscommunication. My staff sent this to the Ontario Regional Office. It should have came here. So that's why it's a late resolution. But Health Canada is taking a review of national drinking water standards. And one of the things they're looking at increasing the limits of 1,4-dioxane up from 30 parts per billion up to 50. And so 1,4-dioxane is a leachate indicator test. And leachate is a cancer-causing issue, according to a toxicologist we have commissioned from Queen's University. In the United States, the Environmental Protection Agency, a number of states have lowered the levels to less than 3 milligrams per liter. And so Canada is going in the wrong direction. Instead of increasing, they should be following the EPA, what the EPA is doing in the United States. And so it's a very serious issue because it can cause, if this gets into groundwater, and there's a number of, still a number of First Nations that rely on groundwater to service their homes, and there's a number of First Nations in Ontario and other parts of the country that are in close proximity to large provincially licensed landfill sites.
Thank you, Chief. Any other comments on resolution number 60? I would like to read the therefore be it resolved clauses. Pour ce motif, les chefs en assemblée demandent à la Santé Canada de consulter les Premières Nations sur la ligne directrice et le document technique proposé par le 1.4 dioxane. Enjoignant au chef national de l'Assemblée des Premières Nations d'écrire une lettre au secrétariat du Comité fédéral provincial territorial sur l'eau potable pour demander de consulter les Premières Nations sur la ligne directrice de 50 grammes par litre et le document technique proposé avant l'approbation de la ligne directrice. B, d'appliquer le principe de précaution et de ne pas adopter de ligne directrice pour l'eau potable supérieure à 3 grammes par litre. Enjoignant le chef national de l'APN de demander à Santé Canada de fournir des fonds aux Premières Nations pour qu'elle engage des experts dans le cadre de l'initiative de ligne directrice sur le 1.4 dioxane dans l'eau potable afin de pouvoir contribuer de façon significative à cette ligne directrice. I do apologize to my Francophone delegates. I'm getting better and better the more I'm speaking. Il manque de pratique. Any conversations on resolution number 60, our last resolution, our only resolution remaining? Seeing none, I'll look to anyone abstaining for resolution number 60. Any objections to resolution number 60? Seeing none, we have adopted resolution number 60 by consensus. Thank you very much, everyone. I do want to thank our resolutions committee. Thank you very much. I should congratulate you for your work getting through 60 resolutions in 5 minutes. So thank you very much, everybody. Our blankets in the back, once again, for the youth Grassy Narrows. With that, I think we are 5 minutes past schedule, which is fantastic. At this point, I'd like to call on National Chief Perry Bellegarde for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Matthew. Wow. Good job, Assembly, and good job to the Resolutions Committee. My hat's off to you all. Getting all those 60 resolutions done. Thank you so much for your good work. And the distributions on this side. Won't forget you guys. Now, just quickly, Chiefs, I know it's been a long 3 days, but I do want to, again, acknowledge and thank our hosts, the Algonquin Nation, the Algonquin peoples, for always welcoming us to their unceded, unsurrendered lands here. So I lift them up. You know, I want to acknowledge Chief Kirby White Duck for his words and his welcome here early on from Pikanchugum. Very powerful. And for those of you that weren't in our pipe ceremonies every morning, I want to acknowledge those people that participated, the male elders and the female elders. It brought so much balance and so much good strength. I want to lift them up and say thank you to them for doing what they've done for all of us in a good way. We start off in a good way when you put the pipes and the sweetgrass and the prayer cloths, tobacco, all those sacred items that were there, the drum, you know, very important. I want to acknowledge and thank those people that have done that. I also want to say as well. There's somebody from, it's hard when being national chief, but what I get strength from is when I see people from back home. And I want to acknowledge my little cuz from Little Black Bear. She's on council. So Monica, representing Little Black Bear, I said I was going to do this because I want to give her a shout out. She stayed here from start to finish, and I want to lift her up and say thank you because Little Black Bear is in the house. So thank you so much. She didn't say anything, but she is, let me tell you, back home, representing our people really well. She stirs the pot because every time I go home, she says, I got to stir the pot here, cousin. And I say, why? You get better soup. And so, so she's always doing that. So Monica, I wanted to lift you up and say thank you for being here. It connects me back home. It's really good. I also wanted to say, Chiefs, we've gone through 3 days. So we talked about the importance of language legislation, child welfare legislation, Bill C-262, tabled in January. We've got some work to do in terms of getting them passed. We've got work to do on policy development, comp claims, spec claims, ATR, inherent right. And there's work to do there. We have to get that done. There was a reference to treaty implementation, mechanisms, treaty mechanisms. We've got to work on that and see where that's going to take about the nation-to-nation relationship. That's something that we have to do going forward. And I want to make a comment on this. The rights recognition framework legislation is done. Let's be clear on that. You passed another resolution, and there are two very important pieces, getting the Prime Minister involved and having another forum, because we've always said it's only First Nations that can drive the path to decolonization. And so we're going to have to get that work done. I wanted to say that very publicly here so people know there's no rights recognition framework. It's done. You even said it here. It's on hold. We understand you need more time. But we have to lead that next process going forward. First Nations led. The Chiefs have been clear on that. So I want to acknowledge you for that good direction and the good work from Grand Chief Ed John and Grand Chief Gord Peters coming together to work on the resolution, finding that good balance between Ontario and BC. That's what it's all about, dialogue and coming together and have that unity and respect and working together. I also want to say as well to Cookby Judy Wilson, I've got your letter. We're going to follow up to make sure that no one is disrespected in this assembly from anybody, and we're going to follow up on that. Your Chief Judy Wilson, and everybody must say that every time here in this assembly. I don't care who you are, and we're going to follow up on that for sure. I want to assure you that, Chief. I also want to say in terms of what the next teams are or the path forward, again, we acknowledge resolutions distribution, but I acknowledge two individuals all the time because I only got two, how you say in management operational terms, two direct reports. Well, Paulette Tremblay, you're part of the team, so I lift her up as a CEO, and Bob Watts as Chief of Staff. They're two Mohawks. There you go. And they're awesome people, and they do a great job. I want to say thank you from me. I want to give them both a round of applause. Please join me, Chiefs. Paulette's here. Bob's doing his political work somewhere. He's good. And I wanted to say that there. Chiefs, there's a couple things we did. We honored people in a good way, in a respectful way. We remembered and honored Wendell Nicholas, Chief Harry St. Denis, and of course, Elder Elmer Cruchen. We honored them, prayers for fast journeys to that good place. And we also prayed for their families for strength and courage and peace at this difficult time. We've done that. And I think that biggest teaching is what the old people always say. You never know when death will come, but we know it will come. And so always carry those teachings of love, truth, honesty, respect, courage, wisdom, humility. Those individuals that I mentioned always conducted themselves with that, with those teachings. So I always say, well, you lift them up. You lift them up in their journeys over there. And we know we'll see them again. And they can still continue to help us in a spiritual way. And we'll call upon them for that help. I want to say that in a respectful way because they're such wonderful people. I also want to say in the sense that the highlights for me, and there's two for me, but one in particular was World War II veteran, Levi. What a powerful moment. 90 plus years, 94, 95, a code talker. And he was with us. Did you see the smile on his face? We honored him while he was alive. And he did such a wonderful job, not only for himself, his family, his community, his nation, but for Canada and USA. That was fantastic. That was a big honor for me, just even meeting him. And I want to lift him up and say thank you for what all he's done as the code talker. I also want to say relationship building. We brought people here for relationship building. We did bring the leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. But as well, Andrew Scheer, Jagmeet Singh, Elizabeth May. It's relationship building. We also brought the ministers. And it's all about relationship building going forward to an October 2019 election. And we're going to keep trying to do that, finding ways to make this assembly more relevant and responsive. We're political. We're advocates for policy and legislative change. So we need to work with whoever gets elected into those offices. So we tried this road now to build those relationships going forward into that next thing they call that federal election. The second thing, even on Tuesday night, acknowledge the chiefs and the grand chiefs and the regional chiefs that showed up at Tuesday night at the gathering of people, you know, our parliamentary reception. You had ministers there from the Crown. You had ambassadors there. You had provincial leaders. You had chiefs, grand chiefs, regional chiefs. And it was networking. We had over 100 and some people there. But the highlight there for me, and the hope was, when those two youth from Kitiganzi B got up and took the stage, and they spoke Algonquin so fluently. And so, to Adeshkun and Aya, I want to lift them up and say thank you, because what they did was they provided so much hope by doing what they did. They spoke their language. And little Adeshkun was just so fluent. He just flowed. It flowed. It wasn't scripted. He knew his stuff. And then he sang that round dance song. So to me, that provided so much hope that our young ones, our little ones, are getting it. And that's so powerful to see that things are on the right road. So I wanted to say them, and a big shout out to them. And then little Adeshkun was saying, yeah, he was doing that round dance song. He said, you know what? There's going to be a round dance in Ottawa. He said, yeah, when? He said, AFN's going to put on a round dance, and you better come. Said, I'm there, Chief, he said. I said, January 18th, there will be a round dance in Ottawa. And it's going to be on the urban res in Ottawa, Vanier. And so it's good. But we're asking each of the regional chiefs, though, as well to do something in their territories on that same night. Because it's ceremony, it's feasting, it's prayer, and it's also a giveaway back to the community. And so AFN's going to do that. I don't know if we've ever had one here, but we're going to start. And it was passed by motion by the executive. And that was a big thing, that we're going to start doing these things in a good way. So January 18th, we're going to see, hopefully Adeshkun can be there with us and the other ones. So that's January 18th. So as well, I wanted to say a big thank you as well to the general manager here at the Westin, Ross Meredith, and to Brian Doan Security, and to Paulette, and as well to Bob, because we got our youth in, the AI youth. You know, the Associated Iroquois Allied Indians, the youth, they marched. It was cold out. And they're marching to show their concern about this rights recognition framework. And they were outside. And so we said, let them in. And so we had to wrangle that. And so the Westin found a way to do that. And I want to say thank you. Because if you didn't do that, we wouldn't be here next year. Said it quietly, but hey, it worked out. So I wanted to thank the Westin. Thank you for being flexible in your policies and your approach. We needed to hear from the youth. And so that was very powerful. Thank you so much for that. And so, friends and relatives and chiefs, again, just to thank you for being here. The next AGA, our annual gathering, is July 23, 24, 25 in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Chief Alan Polchis is going to host us all at St. Mary's First Nation there. Oh, here's this here, Chief. Chief, thank you for staying to the end. So keep that in mind. That's when we're going to make our way out to your territory. And so with that, Chiefs, it is Christmas time. From my family to yours, good health and happiness and much love. Safe travels back to your home fires. And let's keep our circle strong. That unity is so important. We can't do anything without that unity and strength. And we need to work together with that. So with that, I'll say Ekushe, Kenaskum Tinawao. Hi, hi. Oh, our chairs.
All right.
Harold, I'm sorry.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you very much, National Chief. I do want to call for the closing of the Assembly of the 2018 Special Chiefs Assembly. I would like to invite our host elder, Rose Baudouin Wawate.
Yeah, she's coming up.
You're coming up.
While she's coming up too, I aired, we have 2 wonderful co-chairs, 3 wonderful co-chairs, and 1 got hurt. So we got to send some love out and healing prayers to Russell here. She wasn't here, but I thank the co-chairs. They did a great job. Please, thanks Matthew and Harold always. Thank you so much. There is the banquet tonight, Chiefs, and so we'll be there shortly to do some welcoming. Then we got to go to Montreal. There's a First Ministers meeting tomorrow on the economy, so we'll see you tonight for a little bit, and then we got our team moving up to Montreal with Chief Gislain and Chief TG and the rest of our crew here. We're going to talk about the economy, so we're still going to be going. So if we don't see you tonight, we'll see you down the road. I just wanted to say that as well. And sorry, Rose, sorry for taking your time.
I'm going to take your time right now. Quick enough. Firstly, I want you to know that I was honored to be asked as an elder to represent the Algonquin Anishinaabe and welcome you to the Algonquin unceded territory. I would like to thank you for all your continuous dedication, for the very important work that you did here, for the past 3 days and the work that will continue when you return home to your communities. I would like also to acknowledge the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, ministered, and the other guest speakers. For me, I would like to acknowledge one thing. One of the ministers didn't acknowledge our unceded territory. That's okay. I wanted to say that because my Grand Chief is here, and she also noticed. I thank you for that, Verna Paulson. I was very touched by how we honored Chief Harry St. Denis and elders that have journeyed into the spiritual world, joining our ancestors. I was also very touched to witness the honoring of the veteran Levi Oakes, who was a code talker and made of history. All of the topic I addressed in the past 3 days, housing, culture, health, environment, climate change, education, they're all important, but the 2 that holds closest to my heart, child protection, child services, and language. The language has its own story. I speak my own language. I'm a residential school survivor. And when I went to the residential school, I was told not to speak my language. I was very fortunate, though, when I went home, that my people from Rapid Lake, Boyer Lake, the elders there, they spoke their languages. And I now continue my language. And the other one is a story of a child that are stolen, that are taken from their parents. I'm going to say this, the parents, if I know, And it broke my heart till this day to see them walking around being as parents, still not having one. They had 8 children. One by one, they were taken away from them. And they were adopted, some of them. And the last one was taken right out of the hospital while she was nursing. That broke my heart. I work with these people. I bring them as much as I can when I go in the bush. What do we do for the parents that lose their children? We talk about monies, how much monies that the government is going to give us. But what about the healing lodges? We need the healing lodges for these parents that lost their children, that's been taken away from them, being adopted into social services. We had asked at one time to ask for a healing lodge. He says there's no monies for that. Because these parents, they lost their role as parents. And we wonder why. They go to the trauma, they drink, they do drugs, they fall into addictions. I see them go through that, and it breaks my heart. And for me, I'm glad that we are going to have the protection for our children, because this cycle's got to stop. And as for me, yesterday I had witnessed young kids that demonstrated their well-being as to being a youth. That's the only sad part, that I saw that they couldn't come in because they were stopped by the door to see what our national chief, our grand chiefs, regional chiefs, our community chiefs are doing. We put our children in the front line when we make all of our meetings. It's the same thing with the elders. Sometimes, not all, they are pushed aside after when they get done with them. So please, please, do not push our children away, because they are our next leaders. I see that too many times. I live that. Our children are our future and need to be provided adequately housing, being provided good health care, a good education to become self-sufficient. They need the culture to be passed on to them through the use of our language. And only we can do this for them. Not a non-native home. We need to keep our children home among our people and in the safe environment to maintain our identity. I want to acknowledge our drummers, our wonderful singers, as well as the elder community. Lastly, I want to wish everyone safe travel back to home to join your families and communities, and to keep our sacred fire going. And I wish you happy holidays. I'll do my closing prayer in my language, and you do yours in yours, the way you know. I'm going to thank the Creator for all that He created, our environment as to what we use. in our lives. Miigwech tebenjigis, kinkinagay ungagigisen daman umaki, chujoaki, makinaka kumok. Kinagadawe sismak, newen inegisiats, Venesisik inegisiats kinagino, kigos manan, inegisiats. Kiminto kumanan, kegino, minigikasi minuguik, idewit mina. Gimiski minan, katik. Wabugoni etsinibuk, kantaguk, mi pichimanashik, jujuaki. Nibigak tindaguk, aga nibidugubanin, adige deiguban. Tibuki gizes, unukshik. Ne sewins from Makadaguk. Newen en egzias be madzijik. Newen wejin wek. Bugusen manan de benjigets, gijren madden, kagi bagishnanjin, gidin sinavimnan. Bugusen manan de benjigets. Kak was a jik, gijim madziat. Gijinagdom madden ginijansunan. We went to get a madziat. It's a week so much, Omikinawa. Keen work at the endowsman, get a canoma, Guinea Johnson and Quick, Jamosiat. You go send man and this, they benji gets. Get him squeezy, get a canoma seek. Can I get me naik, they benji gets, Kagisha canoma gets. Keen work at the endowsman. When I get in Mike. To me, go to Magagi be shot. We could just thought, Nick, Kagi, great dear, no, ma. Tapscos Kagi, no much. Onago, Tobis, would they wagon. Kagi can imagine giving basic woman Kagi, Matan Janaji. They wagon already, Kagin room touch. Go then, we're gonna get Dadman. Someday we'll all meet together. And this is what's happening. And he says that it's not finished a song. So we are going to continue to meet. So I thank the Creator. Miigwech.
Miigwech Elder Rose, I'd like to cue our drummers from Bear Nation, the best dressed drummers west of BC. Higawa Min Min Minoa.
Yeah.